This cake tastes baked. Follow me on Instagram. Thank you, bye. This case takes place in the UK in the year 2018. Meet Lucy Mchugh. Lucy was born on the 24th of October 2004. Her parents are Andy Mchugh, her biological father, and Stacey White, her mother. Lucy also had a brother named Dylan. Dylan and Lucy's parents split when they were young. Her father tried to maintain a relationship with Lucy, but they often fell out, and they didn't speak to each other for several years. Lucy's mother Stacey would go on to meet a new partner named Richard Elms. Lucy was known to be a bundle of fun, laughter, generosity, and kindness. She was generally a happy child and early teen, despite being her own biggest critic. She spent her time partaking in sports, art, drama, and music, but her favourite thing to do was to travel with her family, and her favourite place to go was the beach. She loved running through the Cornish waves, sprinting across the sandy beaches, with an ice cream in her hand, exploring the hidden coves. She was adventurous and daring. Throughout her childhood, Lucy would write diaries, and there was no telling how valuable these diaries were about to become. Lucy had big ambitions. She wanted to become a lawyer and move to the United States, hoping to provide legal services to those in need. However, when she was just 12, Lucy's life took a dramatic and tragic turn. Despite her wisdom and maturity beyond her years, she was still a child, vulnerable and in need of protection, and her world would irreversibly change when she met a man by the name of Stephen Nicholson. Stephen was born in 1993. Little is known about his early life, parentage, or his upbringing. However, it is clear that his childhood was far from ideal. By the age of 13, he had been placed in a children's home, indicating that his parents either lacked the ability or the desire to care for him properly. This was certainly not an ideal start to his teenage years, a critical period of development. During this time, he became involved in serious criminal activity, and by 14, he was consuming illegal substances. And on one occasion, he decided to round up the staff and child residents of the home using a bladed article. He moved them into a room under the threat of being stabbed. Next, he grabbed one of the female workers and held a knife up to her throat. He forced her to hand over £1,000 and then took the car keys of another member of staff. He tried to make his escape, however the police caught up with him and he was promptly detained. For this violation of the law, he was given a 2-year sentence in a youth detention centre. His charges were false imprisonment, affray, possession of a knife in a public place, theft, damage to property, aggravated vehicle taking, and other driving offences. But as you can imagine, being a tearaway with a propensity for violence, a detention centre surrounded by like-minded individuals is probably not the best environment to cultivate rehabilitation, and instead, his violence escalated. One day, he and 2 other inmates barricaded themselves in the canteen. They then proceeded to arm themselves with knives. Now, what exactly they were trying to achieve is unclear. However, a prison guard tried to defuse the situation, but Stephen made several attempts to stab him. Luckily, the guard was wearing a stab-proof vest, otherwise he would have sustained a fatal injury. It is clear that this man was no stranger to knife-wielding and was not a moral teen. As Stephen grew into adulthood, he sofa-surfed and eventually got a semi-permanent residency in a flat. Throughout this time, he learned to tattoo. Among other tattoos, he had the word freedom tattooed above his eyebrow. This particular tattoo would not age too well. In June of 2012, when he was 18 years of age, he was in communication with an underage girl known as AB. She was 14 at the time and was looking to get a tattoo from Stephen. Stephen agreed to tattoo her and her friend without their parents' permission. The 2 girls went round to his flat for the tattoos. After this, Stephen sent AB a message on social media, and the 2 started chatting. The conversation soon turned flirtatious, and Stephen's first known attempt at grooming someone. He asked AB if she would have sex with him. Being young, naive, and likely thinking she knew what she was doing, AB accepted the offer. The two met, and this was Stephen's first essay on a young girl. At some point after this, Stephen got a woman pregnant and eventually had a child, but the specifics of this are unclear. Despite now being a father, he continued to engage in criminal activities, selling illegal substances, earning himself over £500 a week. In May of 2017, Stephen was in need of accommodation. He needed another sofa to surf. And this time, he turned to his childhood best friend for assistance, Richard Elms, stepfather to Lucy Mchugh. People have since questioned, how much did Richard Elms know about Stephen's past? Did he know about his time in care, at the youth detention centre, his relationship with AB, or his current illegal substance dealing? And did Richard mention any of this to his partner, Lucy's mum? I would like to think that Lucy's mum was unaware. When Stephen moved into the house, he came as a package. He kept several pets, however they weren't the cuddly, fluffy kind. Stephen brought with him a 9-foot boa constrictor, pythons, a gecko, a tarantula, and 2 chameleons. Shortly after moving into the house, Stacy got him a job at a care home working for the elderly. Somehow, he was able to dodge a police check, and his previous actions didn't affect him from getting a job in the care industry. When Stephen moved in, he also brought his tattoo equipment. It is perhaps understandable how the impressionable and curious preteen Lucy would become fond of him. Stephen was new and he was different, and Lucy, she was at a very sensitive point in her development. He was like no other person that she had been friends with before. He appeared mysterious, cool, and elusive, and so Lucy, at 12, developed a crush on Stephen. But instead of being a responsible adult and handling Lucy's feelings with care and decency, he encouraged her and tried to seek her affections for his own sinister end. And he had access to Lucy both day and night. His bedroom was right opposite hers, just meters away. It wasn't long before Stephen had groomed Lucy into intimate activities. In less than 1 month, Stephen slept with Lucy. At first, Lucy was captured by Stephen's perverted manipulations, and she would even brag about the relationship to her friends at school. She referred to him as her boyfriend, and she would even write in her diary about her activities. According to the reports, one particular entry on the night she lost her virginity was harrowing. However, after some time, there was a significant shift in her state of mind. She appeared to be troubled. She became a shadow of her previous bubbly self. She was riddled with anxiety, and her diary entries would soon change. She was concerned, and she knew that something wasn't right. As Stephen grew more confident, he began to help himself to her in any way he wished. She wrote in her diary how the then 25-year-old Stephen would choke her during these encounters. And not only this, in one note entitled Abuse, Lucy wrote that he would make her do stuff, and that when she told him to stop, he would continue. She was forced to lock herself in the bathroom to avoid any intimacy. Lucy once wrote in her diary, "Whatever this is, it has to end." This was seen as an exceptionally profound moment in Lucy's life. She had the maturity and clarity of a young girl wiser than her years. She became aware that what was happening was incredibly wrong, and that she was being manipulated. Meanwhile, at school, Lucy's teachers heard about these rumours. Lucy's mother was called into the school and was confronted with these allegations. According to some sources, Lucy's mother was in a state of denial that a man that she had brought into her own house was doing this to her daughter right under her nose. Lucy then denied ever saying any of this to her friends. In response to this situation, Lucy's mother Stacy then believed that the school was trying to meddle in their lives, and so she removed Lucy from the school and sent her to another. Now, although Lucy did deny any relationship with her and Stephen to her teachers, they took immediate action by referring their concerns to the multi-agency safeguarding hub. An investigation took place, whereby Southampton City Council had launched an urgent and serious incident review after they were warned that Lucy had a boyfriend who was over 10 years older than her. But despite this, their inquiries were ultimately dropped after Stacey insisted that Lucy was in no danger. The question remains, how could such an egregious claim be dismissed so easily? This turbulent time only further isolated Lucy from her family and friends and caused conflict within her house. Around this time, the relationship with Stephen began to sour and they began to fight at home. Lucy and Stephen would have shouting matches where they would shout all kinds of profanity towards each other. Stephen would refer to her in some of the most foul and misogynistic terms. And again, he was the adult and she was the child. He even said to Stacey that he felt like punching Lucy. And then Lucy found out that Stephen was selling illegal drugs from their home, and she would make this known to members of her house and the street. Lucy was ultimately silenced by her stepfather and mother. She was told that these accusations could get Stephen into a lot of trouble. Around this time, Lucy was being treated for ADHD and regularly met with a therapist. Lucy's mother Stacey knew that these outbursts and accusations are a symptom of ADHD, so according to her, they put this down as bad behaviour. Before too long, Lucy became terrified of Stephen. Stephen would text Lucy saying that he was going to hire a group of girls to beat her up after one heated exchange. According to Stephen, on one occasion, he and Lucy were having an argument when Lucy's stepfather Richard walked in and called her a misogynistic term. If this is true, it paints a picture that Lucy had no support within her family household. Now during this time, Lucy was in a different school, and it didn't take long before further allegations came from this school as well. However, Lucy's mother Stacey claimed that her child was living in a fantasy world, and that simply, Lucy just had a crush on Stephen. Social services became involved again, but only ended with no further action being taken. The investigations were high level, but they were dismissed when Stacey and Richard claimed that Lucy was in no danger. These multiple investigations and people confronting Stacey with accusations only turned her to blame Lucy. Stacey told Lucy that she needed to shut up and that she would ruin Stephen's life if she continued. According to a school friend, Lucy had confided in her, saying that her boyfriend was slapping her and that things were getting worse. On the Sunday before the 25th of July 2018, Lucy confronted Stephen in an argument, telling him that it was his fault and that she had a hold over him. Witnesses thought that she was referring to his illegal substance dealing, but they were wrong. She said to Stephen that she was pregnant and that she was going to tell her mother. It was later established that Lucy was not pregnant. Lucy's mother and Richard had grown exhausted by the constant conflicts, and so they told Stephen to leave. Stephen complied and he went to live with his mother. However, he left all of his belongings and his animals at their home. Later that night, Lucy confided in Richard that she wanted to tell him and her mother something very important. However, her mother returned home after Lucy had already fallen asleep, and the opportunity for Lucy to share her concerns was missed. She wanted to tell them that she was pregnant and that Stephen was the father. The potential to expose Stephen's abuse to her mother and stepfather could destroy Stephen's life. Stephen realized that eliminating Lucy became the only way to protect himself from being revealed as a predator. The way that Stephen saw this is that she became a significant threat to his freedom. On Tuesday the 24th of July 2018, Stephen called in sick to work at lunchtime, claiming that he was ill. However, this was a lie. That afternoon, he cycled to the flat of an elderly man he knew. This man suffered with dementia, and would make for a great alibi and a great location to plot what happened next. He ordered some shoes with next day delivery, so no footprint could be linked back to a pair of shoes that he is known for having. He got out some old clothing, which again, people would not associate with him wearing. He now had an outfit to dispose of once he had followed through with his grand plan. But next, he needed Lucy, and Stephen was able to convince her to meet him. On the 25th of July 2018, at around 9 AM, Stephen made his way to a Tesco Express shop. It was later discovered that he did this to make sure the CCTV would capture him wearing a specific outfit. Just after 9 AM, Lucy is seen by CCTV walking towards a sports centre by herself, the area where she had agreed to meet Stephen. Lucy had taken her brother's watch so she could tell the time, as her phone was confiscated by her mother. She is described in court documents as walking purposefully. Little did she know, she was walking into a trap. The last piece of chilling footage was her walking past the same Tesco Express. The reason why she was meeting Stephen is not known, but it appeared to be urgent. When Stephen and Lucy met, he took her through some dense foliage off the beaten track through a woodland. Stephen came wearing a different set of clothing than before, and armed with a kitchen knife. Once the two were in a secluded location, Stephen approached her wielding the knife, and made his first moves. He attempted to stab Lucy, but she defended herself, only sustaining defensive slashes and stabs to her arms and wrists. However, seconds later, Stephen overpowered Lucy and managed to unleash 5 intentionally placed stab wounds right to the side of Lucy's neck. One of these stab wounds sliced through Lucy's carotid artery, an artery known for its high-pressure blood flow. Blood projected onto Stephen and the surrounding area. The sudden blood loss after sustaining traumatic and painful wounds led to a sudden loss of consciousness. Stephen then continued his vicious attack and began stabbing Lucy in a horrific frenzy. In total, 27 stab wounds were found on Lucy. Pathologists would later say that many of the wounds that were inflicted were done after she was already dead. Stephen had proceeded to stab Lucy in the face over and over again. After murdering Lucy, Stephen returned to the flat where the man with dementia lived, and then he cycled home. On his way back, he deviated from his usual route to burn and dispose of the bloodstained outfit he had worn during the attack. He discarded the burned clothing deep in the bushes in an attempt to hide the evidence of his crime, along with other items soon to be regarded as his murder kit. When Lucy didn't return home later that day, her mother Stacy grew concerned. Stephen pretended to offer his sympathies and supported the family by sending a text message, hoping that they find Lucy soon. However, it wouldn't take long for Lucy's body to be found. The following day, on Thursday the 26th of July at 7:45 AM, Lucy's body was found. News of the murder spread quickly, and to further his despicable manipulative behaviour, Stephen acted horrified and concerned for Stacy and Richard when it was discovered that Lucy was dead. An investigation soon began. It was clear to the police early on that the perpetrator was someone who Lucy knew, someone who was close to her, and someone who was likely male. Lucy was not the kind of person to likely wander into the woods by accident, and the blood spray and pooling indicated that she was killed there, and not killed somewhere else and then dumped. Almost immediately, the police investigation turned towards Stephen, especially once they had possession of Lucy's diaries and began reading through the pages. It was clear that the two were having an illegal relationship and that Stephen was incredibly abusive. Stephen was arrested just days after Lucy's death. When the police requested his phone, Stephen claimed that his phone had broken. However, Stephen was unaware that the police could track his phone's location and usage. The police contacted his service provider and they were given the data. Normally, Stephen would respond to text messages and calls within 7 minutes, but during the 3 hours and after Lucy was last seen, Stephen did not respond to any communication. This suggested that he was not near his phone, possibly leaving it at the elderly man's flat. During the police interview, Stephen maintained that on the day of Lucy's death, he had cycled to and from the flat where the man with dementia lived. However, the police picked him up in CCTV and noticed a big suspicious lag in the journey that he had told them he had taken. In the CCTV, Stephen could be seen carrying a plastic bag. Moments later, he was seen on CCTV again, but this time, his plastic bag seemed to be lighter, like he had disposed of something inside the bag. All the police had so far was circumstantial evidence, and they were going to have to release him within 96 hours of his arrest, which of course ran the risk of him destroying any further evidence. The police soon found Lucy's iPad and saw messages on Facebook between the two. Lucy had told Stephen that she was pregnant, and Stephen responded that she was talking nonsense. Although many of these messages were deleted after sending, and for some reason they were unable to be retrieved, so it was hard to fully understand the conversation. So far up to this point, the police had been surprised by Stephen's compliance, but this changed when they requested Stephen's Facebook password. The police wanted to check the other side of the messages and uncover what was deleted from Lucy, but Stephen denied them access. This refusal rang alarm bells for the detectives, and the refusal helped the police in a very unexpected way. Under Section 49, Regulation of Investigatory Powers, Act 2000, if a person is suspected of committing an act of terror or child endangerment and refuses access to social media, the refusal itself can be a criminal offence. Stephen was charged with this offence and was sentenced to 14 months in jail after pleading guilty to Section 49. This conviction was desperately needed and took the pressure off the investigation. With more time, the police began scrutinising Stephen's phone data. The data wasn't very precise, so the police could only pin down a large area. The area was so large that it would take 2,240 police personnel shifts to search. This equated to 14 police officers working 2 shifts per day for 80 days. And so, the police began to search this area, looking for any evidence that would pin Stephen to the murder. 9 weeks after Lucy's murder, the largest fingertip search in UK history was undertaken. Over 30,000 square meters were covered, and they found the bag. Inside the bag was a blood-stained hoodie, blue latex gloves, with Lucy's blood on the outside. Stephen's DNA was found on the items and in the gloves. With this finding, Stephen was removed from prison and presented with the evidence. His jaw dropped as he was charged with the murder of Lucy Mchugh. Before in the story, I mentioned a young girl named AB who was manipulated and essayed by Stephen. Well, AB bravely came forward and told her story to assist in the case and to bring Stephen to justice. The trial would soon begin. The prosecution were able to uncover that the case had several aggravating factors, with the main one being that Lucy was of vulnerable age. The prosecution also highlighted that the evidence suggested a chilling and sinister premeditation and planning. They then highlighted how brutal and ferocious the attack was and the attempts to divert the police's attention. Stephen was found guilty of the murder of Lucy and for forcing himself upon AB. During the sentencing, the judge read aloud, "Stephen Nicholson, on the morning of the 25th of July 2018, you murdered Lucy Mchugh, having exploited her in an utterly selfish and depraved way. She was just 13. Your selfishness and your savagery have blighted her family's lives forever. The sentence is one of life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum term of 33 years, and after that, a parole board will determine whether or not you should be released." Following the sentencing, Stephen showed absolutely no remorse for what he had done and the suffering he has put Lucy's family through during the trial and to this day. Lucy's family have stated that they battle with regret and immense pain to this day. Lucy's stepfather Richard has been branded as complicit in the crimes by members of the public, and as a result, he has experienced a number of attacks. The case of Lucy Mchugh is unbelievably tragic and is a case that should never have happened. For Southampton, the 25th of July 2018 will forever be known as a dark day. This case takes place in Italy and the UK. Jason Peter Marshall was born on the 11th of August 1988 in Greenwich, South London. He was born into a young family plagued with substance addiction. It was a troubled start for him in his early life, and his circumstances only deteriorated from there. At the age of 10, both of his parents were in prison, and Jason suffered as a consequence. He was placed into a children's home in Southend and shuffled among various foster homes. When his mother completed her prison sentence, social services thought it was appropriate to reunite him with her. But she wasn't the best mother, and by 12 years old, Jason began experiencing auditory hallucinations and visual delusions. Sometimes these hallucinations involved angels and aliens. He even believed himself to be the embodiment of the Archangel Gabriel. When Jason was a teenager, he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, a condition characterized by obsessive attention to detail. Not only this, his lack of social skills made it difficult for him to form friendships. As a result, it caused him to retreat further into his own world. Normally, a structured routine helps manage ASD, but Jason had a chaotic life, and this intensified his symptoms of anxiety and depression. On the outside, Jason looked fresh-faced, slim, calm, and quiet. He had chestnut eyes, brown-chopped hair, and flawless skin. However, on the inside, Jason was in profound turmoil. Feeling powerless and no aim in life, Jason despised himself. He saw himself as a nobody, but intriguingly, he recognized the authority and respect that came from someone who wore a uniform. So he took advantage of this. On many occasions, he impersonated members of organizations who wore such uniforms. Jason once claimed that he impersonated an air cadet to steal charity funds. He also dressed as a ticket inspector to hand out bogus fines on the London Underground. Jason even claimed to have infiltrated police stations in Suffolk and Kentish Town to steal radios. He apprehended criminals with a homemade warrant card. It is amazing what a uniform can do. But these were his claims, and it is not clear whether these are delusions or reality. In the year 2008, at the age of 20, Jason tried to take his own life. Because of this, Jason was sectioned under the Mental Health Care Act and was sent to the John Howard Centre. This was a psychiatric unit in East London. He managed to escape from there as it wasn't high security. Following his escape, he committed a series of non-violent crimes, which led to a brief stint in prison. After this, he was monitored by the Dangerous and Severe Personality Disorder Service, otherwise known as the DSPD. This meant living a restricted lifestyle under close monitoring. But 2 years later, he escaped the DSPD whilst he was being transferred to a specialist hostel. But of course he was found again and put back into prison, as he was still a threat to society. By early 2012, Jason was released and was left under the supervision of his general practitioner, which in the UK is a doctor. He was able to find temporary accommodation and secured a job as a street cleaner during the London Olympics. Jason found purpose with his new job, and he began living a normal life. However, this glimmer of stability was short-lived. He lost his job. This sent him into a downward spiral of depression and heavy drinking. It was noted that he would consume 8 cans of beer and half a bottle of Jack Daniels daily. Not only this, but he would regularly mix his drinks with his medication. This was particularly bad, and apparently caused him episodes of memory loss. At this very low point, Jason was searching for meaning, identity, and belonging. In doing so, he became a male escort and regularly hired himself out. Struggling financially and dealing with severe personal issues, Jason Marshall created an alter ego for himself. This allowed him to shield himself from his past trauma. Jason took to various gay dating apps such as Grindr, Badoo, and Adult Work under the name Gabriel. This is where he met many of his clients and would charge £400 an hour. His services were distinctly niche. He focused on S&M, bondage, and roleplay scenarios. Jason had a specific preference for smaller, older men, ideally of Italian descent. In his roleplay sessions, Jason was very elaborate and liked to dress as an MI5 agent, wearing a homemade uniform to enhance the fantasy. He assumed the persona of an authority figure who would arrest his clients on fabricated charges. These encounters were structured as intense interrogation sessions where he would strip his clients and bind them to a bed. His aim was to completely dominate his clients. He would push his clients to a point where they would plead for forgiveness, blending fear with thrill. This created a potent but dangerous experience. The critical event that eventually brought Jason Marshall to public attention occurred one Sunday evening. This was where he met 58-year-old Peter Fasoli through the dating app Badoo. Peter was an IT technician of Italian descent. Peter had a quiet and somewhat solitary life. He lived in a small 2-bedroomed semi-detached bungalow in London. His home was just 1 story high and barely 25 feet wide. Its exterior featured a window spanning the width of the house. He had a mud strip of lawn dotted with potted plants and a bird feeder, as Peter loved birds. The bungalow seemed almost an afterthought at the end of a row of terraced houses, never quite fitting in with its surroundings. This was just like Peter. Peter was a homosexual man who was unmarried and very introverted. Despite living in his community for a number of years, Peter maintained a low profile. Only a few neighbours knew him by name. His inside living space reflected his professional and personal life. The interior was packed with technology. He had numerous webcams, hard drives, monitors, and computers all crammed into one side of the house. This space served as his workspace and a means to socialize. A simple 2-seated sofa faced the bank of screens. Behind this was a cramped box room just big enough to fit in a double mattress. Sadly, this house is the setting where Peter met his end. Peter's family lived in the north of England and had nothing but admiration for him. During an interview, his younger sister Anne stated that he was a great laugh. She said he was always joking around with a dry sense of humour. He had a real cheekiness and it always lit up the room. There was not a bad word that could have been said about him. Peter was caring and thoughtful. He would give a stranger his last penny. On the flip side to this, Peter found socializing beyond family challenging. He was small, shy, and somewhat overweight. This made face-to-face interactions for him quite difficult. Though he loved computers and IT, he had few other hobbies. Not leaving the house much, he had limited opportunities to make new friends. Additionally, he had a heart condition that sometimes caused breathlessness. This caused him to be reclusive. His only relief when breathlessness kicked in was his oxygen tank next to his bed. With that being said, the anonymity of the internet provided Peter with a platform where he felt more comfortable engaging with others. He had much more confidence than he ever could in person. This digital realm allowed him to openly discuss his desires and fantasies. He could openly seek love or casual sexual encounters. This is the reality for many people, not just Peter. It is an unfortunate position to be in and leaves a person vulnerable. Through these online interactions, Peter met various individuals. One man that he would eventually cross paths with was Jason Marshall. In December of 2012, Peter was using the dating app Badoo and stumbled upon Jason's profile. On Jason's profile, it mentioned that he had a taste for older, shorter Italian men who were on the quiet side. The two matched and began talking. Their connection was initially digital, and Peter thought Jason was a safe man, safe enough to invite him around to his house. As they messaged, they both came to an arrangement. The arrangement seemed promising and exciting to Peter. They agreed to meet for a consensual encounter at Peter's home on the evening of the 6th of January 2013. The intentions were that they both wanted to explore each other's fetishes and mutual interests in bondage. No strings attached. On the 6th of January 2013, Jason took the Central Line from Stratford to Northolt. He was dressed in what was assumed to be an MI5 attire under a jacket. This included a black woolen hat, a waist-length jacket, blue jeans, and a black backpack. Jason arrived at around 7 PM and was greeted by Peter. The initial interaction was awkward but polite, very typical of two introverts meeting for the first time. Introductions were exchanged with a mix of nervous jokes about meeting in person. Peter appeared comfortable with Jason, who presented himself well. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere was set with soft lighting and gentle music. Jason then revealed his homemade MI5 uniform, which was far from authentic. The outfit was made up with makeshift items, like a black lanyard attached to a fake ID that read Jason Marshall, British Secret Intelligence. He had a utility belt with latex gloves, plastic handcuffs, a toy gun, a pretend can of pepper spray, and an old Nokia mobile phone rigged to look like a secret radio device. A little after 7:30 p.m, the small talk had finished. Jason declared to Peter that he was under arrest for espionage and hacking a government laptop. Towering over Peter, Jason commanded him to strip completely naked, and Peter did. Jason then instructed Peter to lie face down on the bed. The thrill of fear was part of the excitement for Peter, but the situation escalated beyond his control. Jason pulled out heavy-duty adhesive tape from his backpack. He then proceeded to bind Peter's wrists and ankles tightly. He then placed a strip across Peter's mouth. Helpless and immobile, Peter was at the mercy of his captor. As Peter lay on the bed, Jason went through his neatly folded clothing and retrieved his wallet. Next, Jason began to demand Peter for the PIN for his bank card. When Peter hesitated, Jason escalated the intimidation. Jason pressed a hunting knife against his cheek. It was now abundantly clear. The situation had moved from a consensual roleplay into real terror. Peter endured increasing brutality as he refused to comply with the demand for his PIN number. Jason was still lost in his delusion of espionage and interrogation, to the extent that Jason administered an injection into Peter and he called it truth serum. The substance was actually haloperidol, which is an antipsychotic with no truth-inducing properties. Through the ordeal, Peter's screams were muffled by tape and drowned out by classical music. All the while, Peter's pet Budgie squawked with panic, a truly harrowing scene. Jason then sadistically burned Peter with a cigarette. The torture continued, and Peter's pain and fear escalated as the night dragged on. By the time midnight approached, Peter was exhausted and gasping for breath due to his heart condition. He did not have access to his oxygen and had no choice but to relent and give up the PIN. It was either this or die. Jason then briefly left the house, withdrawing £780 from Peter's account at a nearby Shell garage. He made some purchases and then went straight back to Peter's house. He returned after midnight and the situation grew even more grim. Peter pleaded for his life as John decided to eliminate his witness. John began the end by suffocating Peter. He did this by tightly wrapping cling film around his head. He sealed it over his head, and then his face, and then over his nose. Jason was trying to ensure that no air could reach him. Despite being hogtied and suffocated, Peter's fight did not end there. Peter Fasoli fought desperately for his life, struggling against his bonds. Jason then attempted to suffocate him with a plastic bag. The struggle caused them to fall off the bed, landing behind the sofa with a heavy thud. All that remained was the sound of rustling of plastic and Peter's muffled pleads for air. Jason stood calmly and, in an utterly sinister move, delivered a mock benediction in Latin. He said, "In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti," which means, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. He then said, "Ego sum resurrectio et vita," meaning, I am the resurrection and the life. By this point, Peter was dangerously unconscious, and his lungs were filling up with carbon dioxide. Peter had lived a solitary life, and his last interaction seeking connection was to end with tragedy. As Peter appeared to be dead, Jason then staged the scene to resemble a burglary. He rifled through drawers, overturned shelves, and ransacked cupboards. But curiously, he took nothing of value, not even Peter's tech gadgets or his gold watch on his wrist. To further confuse any investigations, he flushed several unidentified items down the toilet. He also pulled out as many wires as he could from Peter's array of computers, silencing the music and cutting off the LED lights. With the room now quiet, Jason lit another cigarette and methodically gathered his belongings. He then began to spread a flammable liquid around the room, focusing on the bed, walls, and sofa, and most intensively all over Peter's immobile body. With a flick of his lighter, flames began to consume the room, quickly filling it with thick black smoke. At precisely 12:41 AM, Jason left the bungalow. He was confident that he had destroyed all evidence of his presence. To obscure his involvement, Jason sent a message to Peter via Badoo. At precisely 9:33 AM the following morning, Jason wrote, "Sorry I didn't turn up last night, felt sick. Would you like to meet soon? From Gabriel." A few hours later, he followed up with, "Are you there?" and then continued to send more messages, such as, "Don't ignore me, I said I was sorry," and "Stop being mean." Jason received no response, so he finally sent, "Fine, be like that," after which their communication ended. Peter's death was a calculated murder for a few £100, leading to an initial investigation that disastrously failed in the capture of his killer, allowing Jason, the Badoo killer, to continue his lethal spree. The reason why this case can be looked into with great detail is the same reason why Jason would eventually be caught for his crime. When Jason was unplugging wires frantically, he missed one of Peter's webcams. The whole torture and the whole murder was caught on camera. But before this evidence came to light, Peter kept his freedom for a little while longer. On Tuesday, the 8th of January 2013, just 30 hours after the murder, Jason used Peter's bank card to purchase a flight to Rome. The transaction went unnoticed, as the card had not been reported stolen. Also, the purchase amount was small, and there was no active monitoring of Peter's bank account. By Friday, the 11th of January, at 6:50 AM, Jason was on a flight departing from Gatwick Airport to Rome. He then lived off the funds he had stolen from Peter, and revelled in a carefree existence. For a short time, Jason enjoyed his new lifestyle funded by his crime, but then the money soon ran out. Jason used the dating app Badoo, but not for social connection, but as a hunting ground for vulnerable and lonely men. He didn't have to search the streets for potential victims. The app provided all the details he needed. User profiles often included age, size, living situation, and sexual preferences. This was all the information that Jason needed to select targets who were older, lived alone, and had submissive tendencies that matched his sadistic desires. On the 26th of January, 20 days after Peter's murder, Jason met 67-year-old Vincenzo. Vincenzo was a retired tour guide and a divorced father who was well known in his community. Jason was still using the alias Gabriel, and he found his next victim through the same deceptive tactics. The tactics that led to Peter's tragic end. At 7 PM, their meeting unfolded like a typical first date between strangers. Jason introduced himself awkwardly. After some polite exchanges, Jason was invited inside, a story that sounds all too familiar. The two men engaged in conversation, and Jason soon revealed his MI5 costume, claiming that he was on an assignment from the British Embassy. Again, his outfit was complete with a homemade ID, plastic handcuffs, and a toy gun on his utility belt. But this time, the ensemble also included real items, like a hunting knife, a truncheon, and real pepper spray. Jason took on the role of the MI5 agent once more. Jason declared Vincenzo under arrest for being a spy. Vincenzo played along, stripping and allowing himself to be gagged and hogtied. Again, what started as consensual roleplay soon began to escalate drastically. Jason demanded, "I want your PIN number." Jason then escalated the violence as he burned Vincenzo with a cigarette. As Vincenzo continued to fight his demands, he struck him with the truncheon. Now Vincenzo was battered and burned, but he still maintained his strength. But then, Jason blinded him with pepper spray until Vincenzo couldn't breathe. Vincenzo finally relented. With a pin obtained, Jason left and quickly withdrew €400 from a nearby cash machine. To make the scene appear like a burglary, Jason trashed the home, but oddly did not simulate an actual break-in. He stole a debit card, laptop, hard drive, electronic gate key, and Vincenzo's car. This time, Jason decided against using cling film or fire as methods of killing and destroying evidence. Instead, Jason opted for a more direct method. He strangled Vincenzo with an electric flex cord. This was a long and arduous procedure, intensifying the pressure until Vincenzo was unconscious. Not totally satisfied, Jason then stabbed him multiple times with his hunting knife in the chest. As Jason stood over Vincenzo's lifeless body, he recited the last rites in Latin. With no immediate threat forcing his departure, unlike last time, Jason left the scene calmly and as quietly as he had arrived. Unfortunately, it would take over a week until Vincenzo's body was found, by which time Jason had long fled the scene. Once his newly acquired finances were spent, Jason became motivated once more. He was ready again to seek, rob, and murder. Set in his sights this time was an Italian man named Umberto Gismondi. Umberto was a solitary Italian man with a taste for S&M bondage and roleplay. He too agreed to meet a stranger he had flirted with online. The man introduced himself as Gabriel, though he was really Jason Marshall, the Badoo killer. On Thursday, the 21st of February 2013 at 7 p.m, Umberto welcomed him into his home. Just like the previous two times, the evening's atmosphere was lit by soft lighting and music. But this time, Jason's movements were being carefully observed by the police from a surveillance van. They were tracking Jason's movements, having linked him to the previous crime through chat logs on Badoo. The police had also tracked withdrawals Jason made with Vincenzo's stolen debit cards, and were aware of the stolen car. The officers watched as the two men engaged in polite conversation. Jason and Umberto shared a meal and watched television, but the expected violent criminal activity did not unfold. The police operation seemed fruitless, and by the end of their shift, the encounter remained non-violent. The surveillance team left, believing the night would continue to be uneventful. However, inside the apartment, the situation deteriorated. Jason's patience began to wear thin as he became frustrated by Umberto's reluctance to engage in the more extreme activities. When Umberto laughed off Jason's claims of being an MI5 agent and mocked his costume, Jason snapped. What followed was a brutal attack. Umberto was beaten, kicked, pepper-sprayed, and battered with a truncheon. Amidst the violence, Jason demanded Umberto's PIN number. Just like Jason's last two victims, Umberto would not easily give up his PIN number, but as the beatings continued and escalated, he eventually relented. These beatings left Umberto seriously injured, but still alive. Jason then stole an iPad and €400 from Umberto's account, but as he was preparing to leave, Umberto's gag came loose. He began to scream for help, attracting the attention of neighbours, who then alerted the police. The neighbours rushed to help, and the police quickly came back to the scene. Umberto provided the police with the name of his attacker, Jason. The police quickly tracked Jason using the GPS from his phone. He was tracked to a bus heading south in the suburbs of Rome. Shortly after, Jason was arrested at 3:30 a.m. He was subsequently charged with attempted murder and murder. On the 9th of July 2014, Jason was on trial for the murder and attempted murder. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. With this sentence, there was a stipulation that at least 3 years of those 16 years must be spent in psychiatric care. With the Badoo killer now imprisoned, the case was officially closed. For now. After Jason's arrest and conviction in Italy, attention turned back to the United Kingdom. There was some newly uncovered evidence regarding the murder of Peter. The evidence was the webcam footage which captured the torture and murder of Peter. This footage was found by Peter's nephew, Christopher. Christopher was the first person to watch the footage. This chilling footage documented the entire murder and was a pivotal moment that changed the course of the investigation. Before this, Peter's death was ruled as an accidental fire, but now there was undeniable proof that this was a murder. Armed with this new evidence, the UK authorities initiated proceedings to have Jason extradited from Italy to face charges related to Peter's murder. The process of extradition involves legal and diplomatic efforts to return individuals accused or convicted of crimes to the jurisdiction where those crimes were committed to stand trial or to serve a sentence. In Jason's case, this process was facilitated by the clear evidence linking him to Peter's murder. The UK and Italian law enforcement officials were very cooperative, and Jason was sent back to the UK. Upon his extradition back to the UK, Jason was formally charged with the murder of Peter. His trial in the United Kingdom brought to light the horrifying details of Peter's last moments, as captured on the webcam footage. Prosecutors presented this footage to the jury. They also presented other evidence, including Jason's use of Peter's bank cards after his death, and the flight to Italy. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution built a very compelling case against him. Jason's defense in the UK included claims of amnesia, and he attempted to downplay his responsibility for his actions. The defense also referenced his mental health issues. However, the overwhelming evidence against him, particularly the webcam footage, made it difficult for the defense to counter the prosecution's case. In the end, Jason Marshall was found guilty of the murder of Peter. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 39 years. This was a sentence that reflected the severity of his crime and the calculated cruelty with which he had executed it. The judge overseeing the case described it as sadistic. The judge said, "You tortured him for so long because you enjoyed it so much. I'm sure that you feel no remorse whatsoever for what you have done." A parole board will determine if Jason is suitable for parole when the time comes. It is entirely possible that he will never be released, but this case can be seen as a cautionary tale for those who seek company online. This case takes place in the UK in the year 2014. Meet Alice Gross. Alice was born on the 14th of February 2000 to her parents Jose Gross and Rosalind Joan. Alice had an older sister named Nina Gross, whom she loved dearly. Together, Alice's parents raised two wonderful children from their home in Hanwell, a town in the London borough of Ealing. Countless people have described Alice as a truly lovely young girl. Her natural curiosity drove her to excel academically. Her head teacher at school would later say that she was incredibly bright. Alice also had a deep connection to nature, which she expressed through her artwork. She was also a gifted songwriter who composed and performed her own songs, which displayed her creativity and emotional depth. She could play the piano, and she was a confident actor. She was adored by her family and friends and all who knew her. However, despite these positive things in her life, Alice had a troubled time leading up to the year 2014. She was going through some personal physical changes, as we all do in our teenage years. And unfortunately, Alice began to struggle with anorexia, a condition that impacted her health and well-being. This was whilst pressure was mounting at school as she was in Year 9, studying for her GCSE exams. This made Alice a particularly vulnerable person prone to fainting. But with that said, she was resilient and she rarely let it get in the way of her education and her love for music. When Alice was at school, she was tasked with writing an essay. The essay was on the issues of freedom of movement across Europe. Essentially, Alice wrote that she believed in the free movement of people across Europe, even if those people had committed crimes. She argued that banning these criminals from entering the UK would introduce the idea of racism, as it would imply Britain believes that foreign criminals are different and more dangerous compared to British criminals. This essay would later be shared by Alice's parents. This detail is a chilling and almost prophetic foreshadowing of Alice's fate. On Saturday, the 28th of August 2014 at 1 p.m, Alice set off for a walk along the Grand Union Canal beside the River Brent. The Grand Union Canal is a scenic, nature-filled stretch of the canal system that connects London to Birmingham. Alice went on walks in nature often, and this wasn't out of the ordinary. As she left, she said to her mother that she would be home by 6 p.m. Alice was very precise when it came to her timings. She would always arrive when she said she would. She was never late, or if she was going to change her plans, she would always let her parents know. And so on this day, she went for her walk. She headed south from Hanwell to Brentford. The route took her past Hanwell Lock, Trumper Field, past Boston Manor Park, and all the way to the Brentford Lock. At 15:45, she was spotted on cameras at Brentford Lock. This was likely the turning point before making her way back up to Hanwell. Alice brought with her her phone, but she also left with no money. She was last spotted near the Trumper Way underpass at 4:26 p.m. Cyclists zipped by, eager to get home on their evening commute. But as Alice walked along the path, an ominous presence fell upon her. A dangerous man was watching, waiting to make his move. Ernest Zalkins. Ernest was born in Latvia in the year 1973, though the specific details about his early life and upbringing are very limited. Ernest grew up in Latvia and began working on building sites from the age of 16. As he reached adulthood, he developed a tendency to pursue young, impressionable women in nightclubs. Whilst in these nightclubs, he also engaged in the dealing of recreational illegal substances. He eventually met a lovely young woman named Rhodita. Rhodita was a seamstress, and Ernest won her over in a nightclub. He showered her with compliments and promises of a happy future together. They both started a relationship, and when Rhodita became pregnant, the couple decided to marry quickly. And in an unconventional choice, Ernest insisted that they both take her maiden name instead of his family name. Rhodita's mother disapproved of Ernest from the beginning. She described him as a controlling man with a fierce temper. She said that this was her daughter's first boyfriend, and that she was deeply in love. So what could she do? She described her daughter as a gentle, loving and carefree soul, but she could also be naive and see the best in people. As their relationship continued, a series of very unfortunate events transpired. To begin with, Ernest would openly have affairs with other women, causing a strain on the marriage. But after their daughter Elvira was born in February of 1995, their relationship worsened even further. Rhodita would write in her diary. She wrote about her growing fear and depression due to her husband's aggressive and controlling behavior. In 1996, after a heated argument, Ernest shot her in the stomach with a low-caliber gun. Although she survived. Ernest refused to pay for her surgery to remove the bullet lodged near her spine, leaving doctors simply to stitch up the wound, leaving the bullet inside of her. Initially, Rhodita claimed that she had been shot by a biker gang in a case of mistaken identity, and she did this to cover up what her husband had done. But she eventually plucked up the courage and told her mother the truth, that her husband Ernest had shot her. With that said, she was still too scared to report her husband to the police, and so she stayed with him. Ernest was a cold, resentful, and paranoid evil man. His aggression continued until 1997, when he administered his final blow. In March of 1997, Ernest decided that he wanted to kill his wife, the mother of his daughter. The motives of this murder are unclear. He made his way to a secluded woodland and dug a hole fit to bury a person. At the side of the shallow grave, he placed a scaffolding pipe and a knife in preparation of what was to come. Arnis went back home and persuaded Rhodita to come with him into the woods. He then lured her to the spot where the grave was, and he hatched his plan. In what must have been some terrifying final moments, he picked up the scaffolding pipe and hit her over the head over and over again. Arnis then picked up the knife and plunged it through her heart. Once she was dead, he dragged her body into the shallow grave and buried her in the earth. He then stood over where her dead body was buried and toasted the moment with a shot of vodka. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he claimed that he didn't know where his wife had gone and expressed worry to his close friends and family. A missing person investigation soon began, and detectives found Rhodita's diaries explaining how she was scared of her husband. Eventually, Arnis was arrested by the Latvian authorities the following year, and in July of 1998, he confessed to the murder of his wife. He then showed them the location where he had buried her. In a pathetic attempt to explain his motive, he claimed Rhodita was a homosexual, and that she had been repeatedly unfaithful and had had encounters with other women in nightclubs. Moreover, he tried to persuade the judge that she was a deviant and that she had touched their young daughter. Whatever Arnis's plan was, it tragically worked. A Latvian judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison, and he would go on to serve only 7. His daughter was then brought up by Rhodita's mother, and Arnis had very little contact with her after his release from prison in 2005. Arnis then married another woman, and the two had a baby boy. Rhodita's mother tried to warn his new wife of what he had done, but his new wife didn't care, and soon enough, the new family of 3 left Latvia with the promise of a better life in London. They emigrated in 2007. Arnis and his new family moved into a house in Ealing, West London. He worked jobs on building sites as a labourer. However, life didn't return to normal for Arnis after the troubles he left behind in Latvia, as in 2009 he was arrested in connection with an indecent assault on a 14-year-old girl. However, tragically, the victim chose not to cooperate with the police, leading to the case being discontinued, and Arnis was subsequently released. At that time, no check for foreign convictions was conducted when he entered the country. It was not standard police policy, and police officers lacked the widespread knowledge on how to perform such checks. And just like that, Arnis got away with another crime against an innocent woman. Rhodita's mother claimed that he was still a threat to society when he left Latvia, but nobody listened to her. On the 28th of August 2014 at 4:10 p.m, Arnis spotted Alice while riding his bike on his way home. His aggression towards women and his sexual urges could not be contained. When he saw young Alice, he knew that he could have his way with her just like the previous girl in 2009, and he likely knew that he might be able to get away with it as well. Alice was a 14-year-old 5'2" girl with a very slim build, and Arnis, he was a 41-year-old man, 5'10" tall with a stocky build. Upon spotting her, Arnis rode past Alice so he could dismount from his bike and hide in a dark spot behind vegetation, waiting to ambush her. At some point after 16:24 p.m, Arnis engaged Alice by swiping her from the path. He grabbed her and took her to a nearby secluded area and ripped off her clothing. Arnis then forced himself upon her. As he carried out this cruel and callous assault, his heavy body weighed down on Alice's small frame, making it incredibly difficult for Alice to breathe. With each exhalation, she struggled for the next inhalation. After he had finished, he looked down. He saw that Alice was dead. He had compressed her small frame so much that he essentially suffocated her to death. In an attempt to cover up what he had done, he took off the remaining clothing and tied her up in the fetal position, wearing nothing but a single sock. He then placed her inside several bin bags and placed several bricks and a bike wheel inside for extra weight. He then rolled up his trousers and carried her into the River Brent. He placed her in a shallow area of the river and covered her with 6 large tree trunk logs in a pyramid shape. After leaving Alice here, he travelled to a local shop and purchased some alcohol. Approximately 25,000 young people go missing in London every single year, which is a shocking statistic, but the majority are found within a few days with multiple reasons for their absence. The authorities know that the first couple of days are critical for locating missing people. Once a few days have gone by, the chances of finding a young missing person dwindles, and so do the chances of them being found alive. Once Alice didn't return home, her mother was distraught. She knew that Alice left the house with no money, so she knew that she couldn't have gone far. Something must have happened. After all, Alice was always punctual and always mindful of time. By the 1st of September, 4 days after her disappearance, the Metropolitan Police had spoken with her friends, conducted house-to-house inquiries, and searched parks and open spaces in an effort to locate her. But Alice was still missing, and there were absolutely no leads. Alice's family then made a heartfelt appeal, urging her to get in touch, saying that they desperately missed her. Her mother voiced her deep concern, explaining that the main reason why her family had such concerns for her well-being was due to her suffering from anorexia. There was a chance that Alice may have collapsed and fallen into the River Brent. The police were worried about this too. However, as more time went on, they knew that this wasn't the case. By now, her body would have decomposed and floated to the surface, making her easy to spot. This then led the police to believe that someone had a hand in her disappearance. On the 4th of September 2014, a week after her disappearance, the police released CCTV footage capturing the last time that Alice was seen alive. In the footage, she could be seen wearing a purple backpack, walking alone. Soon after, the police also announced that they had discovered a purple rucksack that she had been carrying alongside the path. This bag also contained the shoes that she was wearing that day. Her family then renewed their appeals for help, with her mother making an emotional plea. She said, "We'd like to say to Alice first of all that we miss her and that we love her, and that she is in no trouble. We just want to know that she's safe. We just want her to know that she can come home." Investigators then showed photographs to the public of cyclists who rode by the location where Alice was last spotted, aiming to track them down for further information. As a result of this, on the 6th of September 2014 at around 5 p.m, the police took a 25-year-old man into custody in the Ealing area on suspicion of murder. A day later, on the 7th of September 2014, a second man was arrested and taken into police custody. This time, he was 51 years old. But none of them were honest. However, these 2 men were soon ruled out. On the same day, they escalated the searches to include divers and sniffer dogs. Next, Alice's father made another plea for his daughter, expressing how there is a massive hole in the family. But still, there was no sign of Alice. By the 16th of September, the detectives at Scotland Yard uncovered that there was another man in the area at the time that Alice was last seen. This man was Arnis. All focus shifted onto him. The CCTV evidence showed that Arnis would have passed Alice towards the towpath at around 4:10 p.m, when he then stopped for at least 80 minutes before continuing along the path. When he reappeared on camera, Arnis's appearance indicated that he might have been in the water, as his trouser legs were rolled up. The CCTV footage then showed him buying beer in a nearby shop later that evening. As the police kept searching for evidence, they found more footage showing that he was last seen in a shop on the 4th of September. He was carrying a heavy rucksack. When the police went to his house, there was no sign of Arnis. The police then questioned his family, but they were shocked to hear that Arnis had been missing since the 4th of September. The family explained that this was completely out of character, and his family were very worried about him. The authorities thought that he may have run back to Latvia after the 4th of September. However, they were surprised to find that his bank account had not been accessed for days, and his passport was still at home. So where did he go, and what did he do? While the police broadened their search for the victim and the prime suspect, Alice's mother continued her search for Alice. On the 25th of September 2014, 28 days after Alice's disappearance, Rosalind was interviewed by BBC's Crime Watch. On the show, she made another appeal, and a graphic was produced showing Alice's last footsteps. Rosalind said, "There isn't a moment in the day where we're not thinking about Alice, where she is, and what might have happened, or why she disappeared." On the 29th of September 2014, police officers began to comb the National Trust estate named Osterley Park, around 2 miles away from where Alice was last seen. This search became the largest search conducted by the Metropolitan Police since 2005 in the 7/7 bombings. There were around 600 officers across 19 forces. They searched around 25 square kilometres of open land and 5.5 kilometres of canals and rivers. Finally, on the 30th of September, 33 days after she was last seen, Alice Gross's decomposed remains were discovered by police concealed beneath 6 large tree trunks in the River Brent. She was found naked in the fetal position, wearing nothing but a single sock. She was enclosed within layers of bin bags, which had been weighed down by bricks. The rest of her clothing was never found. This was made official when the family identified her body on the 1st of October 2014. The police now knew that she had been murdered. But why? And so they released a statement. A post-mortem was then conducted. Initially, it came back inconclusive in revealing the cause of death. However, the police revealed that Annis's DNA was found on Alice's shoe and a cigarette butt at the scene of the crime. When further examining Annis's workplace and house, they discovered Alice's phone case buried in the back garden, and one of the bags used to conceal her body matched a roll of bin bags found at his workplace. As more tests were conducted on Alice's body, it was thought that the murder method was compression asphyxiation, caused by a larger body lying on top of a smaller body, leading to the suggestion that the motive was sexual. The police kept searching for Annis, thinking that he could still be at large or abroad. However, on the 4th of October 2014, the police uncovered the location of Annis, and he was not in the state that they thought they would find him in. Annis was found 20 minutes away from where Alice's body was found, in a densely wooded area. They found him heavily decomposed, swinging from a tree. This was confirmed when his body was identified 2 days later. It was clear that Annis had murdered young Alice, disposed of her body, and had then done this to himself. And so, the case was closed. Alice's funeral was held on the 23rd of October 2014. She was driven through her hometown of Hanwell, in a coffin decorated with patterns, which depicted a meadow scene and Alice's 3 beloved cats. This was painted by her grandmother, sister, and a family friend, symbolizing her love for nature. The case then became rather politicized, due to Alice being killed by a foreign man. This then led to her parents releasing the essay that she had once written. The Metropolitan Police then announced a policy update after Alice's murder. When a foreign national is arrested, as Annis was in 2009, a thorough background check will now include criminal records from abroad. In 2015, Alice's family called for targeted reforms to improve the exchange of information on high-risk offenders across Europe, making it harder for criminals to enter the United Kingdom. The case of Alice is truly tragic, and is one that should have been avoided. The fact that the UK allowed such a dangerous man to enter the country is nothing short of despicable. This case takes place in the USA in the year 2015. Before we delve into this case, be prepared for a profoundly unsettling and frustrating outcome. This story involves a young victim whose life was tragically cut short, and a resolution that for many fell short of delivering true justice. Meet Tierra Hall. Tierra was born around 1997 to her mother Cotia Pickens and was originally from Texas. There are no current reports to identify Tierra's father, but it is clear that she was raised solely by her mother. Cotia Pickens remembers Tierra as a bubbly and lively child, full of energy and personality. However, beyond these recollections, little public information details Tierra's early childhood. In 2012, Tierra and her mother relocated from Texas to Durham, North Carolina, where Tierra would later attend Jordan High School as a freshman. This move offered a fresh start for Tierra and her mother. She quickly settled into her new school in Durham, where her classmates were drawn to her humour, energy, and lively spirit. Tierra made many close friendships, becoming a positive and well-loved presence in the school community. One of her best friends was Mchugh Wilson. According to Mchugh, they instantly clicked and they became inseparable, describing their bond like two peas in a pod. Those who knew Tierra said that she was gentle and had an innocent spirit. She was described as someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. Each morning, she would tell her mother she loved her before leaving for school, always receiving a "I love you" in return. Tierra liked school, and she dreamed of attending North Carolina Central University, one day aiming to study business, with hopes of someday launching her own enterprise. Growing up in a single-parent household, Tierra had first-hand experience with financial challenges and was determined to create a comfortable and stable life for herself. She had a strong drive to rise up above these struggles. During her time at Jordan High School, she started a romantic relationship with a boy named Kelton Fox. Their relationship began normally, with little to no issues, but like many childhood relationships, by November of 2014, their relationship took a turn for the worst, and they entered an on-off phase. Her mother would later say they would be making up and breaking up all the time. However, over the Christmas break, Tierra broke up the relationship, and she broke it up for good. Tierra's mother would later say that she described him as too clingy, but couldn't provide any further details. Having experienced abuse in a previous relationship herself, Tierra's mother was particularly attuned to signs of unhealthy dynamics, although nothing about Tierra's relationship raised any red flags, and Tierra didn't express any major issues that would have concerned her mother. In fact, Tierra's mother described Kelton as polite and respectful, recalling how he would shake her hand and use "yes ma'am" and "no ma'am" when talking to her. He would even walk Tierra home from school, making sure that she got home safely. This respectful demeanour gave Tierra's mother a sense of security around him, leaving her shocked at the events that later unfolded. She believed that he loved her daughter. Kelton Fox lived with his mother on Cherry Blossom Circle in Durham, North Carolina. Reports describe his early life as unstable, with his father abandoning him at a young age. He subsequently grew up in an environment marked by domestic violence, which left him with lasting emotional scars. His background details remain largely private, though it is known that he developed a fascination with weaponry. He owned a wide range of dangerous items, including a hatchet and various knives. Kelton Fox also attended Jordan High School and was in the same year as Tierra. By September of 2014, they were both in their junior year. As I said previously, their relationship started well, and this was well catalogued in Kelton's journal. In the beginning, he wrote loving messages to Tierra, and drew love hearts with the initials K and T within. But as time went on, these messages changed in tone. They became a little bit more intense. Kelton became more and more fixated and obsessed with Tierra. Now next to these love hearts, he would write quotes such as, "It's you and me only." Then more definitive and intense statements like "hubby and wifey for life" and "ride or die." Next, there was another transition in the tone of his journal. There must have been some turbulence within the relationship during this time, as he started writing monologues which included things like, "Why can't you just be thankful?" And again, clearly in despair, he began writing things like, "There is a darkness inside me. I am a savage. Experts who later analysed Kelton Fox's journals concluded that he had a severe pathological obsession and a controlling behaviour toward Tierra Hall. These writings reportedly detailed violent thoughts and intense jealousy, showing his inability to cope with their breakup, and he maintained his fixation on possessing her entirely. Kelton became very upset and expressed in his journals how he was suspicious that Tierra had cheated on him. Soon, he began writing with pure hatred. In his journals, Kelton wrote disturbing phrases like, "I'm tired of it all. I am done playing the hero. I will take your soul." He then referenced an uncontrollable lust for blood. These entries reveal what analysts described as narcissistic and sociopathic. On Facebook, Kelton operated under the name King K the Savage, an alias he used both online and in graffiti-styled artwork. He even said that Tierra was his queen. On Friday the 27th of March 2015, Tierra left to go to school. It was just like any other day. It was a mild, overcast day in Durham on the lead-up to spring break, a break which Tierra Hall had excitedly planned to spend with her best friend, Amya Wilson, along with a close-knit group of friends. As Tierra moved from class to class that day, CCTV footage showed her moving with unusual caution, and her demeanour was more reserved than usual. She reportedly looked over her shoulder and checked around corners, like she was trying to avoid someone. Later that afternoon, at 4:16 p.m, Tierra crossed paths with her ex-boyfriend, Kelton. As far as we know, following the breakup, the two still remained friends. The two walked together, talking casually, with nothing appearing out of the ordinary. To an observer, their interaction seemed friendly without any visible tension. Tierra took a moment and she sat on a row of oddly placed cabinets. Kelton suddenly stepped slightly ahead of Tierra, and in a quick motion, he swiped her phone from her hand. He kept swinging and swinging for the phone. Some suggest that he may have been paranoid, wanting to check her messages or social media to see if she was talking to any other boys, whilst others believe that he knew taking it would provoke her. After finally grabbing Tierra's phone, Kelton took off. In clear frustration, Tierra stepped off of the cabinet, lifted her head, and began following Kelton. At this point, Tierra seemed unfazed. She followed him with a smile, likely assuming that he was just being playful or even flirtatious. However, unbeknownst to her, Kelton allegedly had darker intentions that went far beyond harmless teasing. Kelton led her off the school grounds and into the surrounding neighbourhood, ignoring her pleas for him to stop and return the phone. Determined, Tierra continued to follow, her frustration growing as Kelton pressed forward without even glancing back once. Eventually they both grew tired, but they continued walking through the neighbourhood of Trotter Ridge Road, separated by a steady 25-metre distance. Where was he going, and why was he persisting with this wild goose chase? Kelton led her to a house, 4123 Trotter Ridge Road, which was 2 blocks and approximately 300 metres northwest of Jordan High School. The property at 4123 Trotter Ridge Road was expansive, surrounded by mature trees that gave it an isolated, almost secluded feeling. The land appeared as though it had been carved directly from the surrounding woodland, creating a natural boundary that provided privacy and limited visibility. According to sources, this property was once owned by Kelton's mother, so it's fair to assume that he was very familiar with it. The house was abandoned and positioned approximately 40 metres from the road through a line of trees. The property on Trotter Ridge Road wasn't in disrepair, but it appeared derelict and unfurnished, as though renovations had begun but had been left incomplete. The evidence points to the following likely sequence of events. Kelton led Tierra around the side of the house, heading toward the secluded rear porch. He suddenly stopped, dropped her phone on the ground, and watched as Tierra walked past him to pick it up. With her back turned, Kelton unsheathed a pocket knife and began quietly moving towards her. In a brutal act of savagery, He plunged his blade into Tierra multiple times. At first, she let out a blood-curdling scream, which the neighbours heard, but the preceding onslaught of stab wounds would put a stop to the screaming. Kelton stabbed her at least 14 times, with multiple wounds in and around her face, through her t-shirt into her chest, and more in the neck region. The attack was so brutal and gruesome that part of the knife broke off and was lodged in her cheek. Kelton attacked her with such ferocity that he severed several blood vessels, causing blood to spray across the area. The porch became a grisly scene, with blood splattered along the lower walls, the blue window frames and the back door. All evidence pointed toward a violent struggle. Tierra Hall tragically died at the scene. After Kelton had brutally attacked and killed Tierra, he used a lighter to burn graffiti into the blue rear door of the house. This message read, "King K the Savage," a reference to the alias he had given himself on social media and in his journals, which symbolized his obsession with control and dominance. The psychological profile of someone who could commit a violent crime and then inscribe their title as king and label themselves a savage points towards a person with a deeply twisted sense of superiority and a love for violence. This is something you don't come across often with serious criminals. It is not known where the murder weapon went, so it is assumed that he disposed of it after the killing. After burning the words into the door, Kelton calmly walked away from Tierra's lifeless body, retracing his steps back towards the school. His indifferent return, moving through the same streets without apparent concern, left investigators and the community deeply disturbed. The calculated manner of his departure raised questions about whether his actions were premeditated. At 4:57 p.m., with the crime complete, Kelton returned to the school and headed straight to the restroom. His red sweater was pulled over his hands in an attempt to hide any blood or evidence on his skin. Surveillance footage captured his behaviour, further hinting at his awareness and intent to conceal his involvement. The deliberate act of going directly to clean up added to the theory that Kelton's actions were premeditated and calculated. After leaving the bathroom, Kelton reappeared with his hands uncovered, suggesting that he had attempted to clean off any blood from his hands. At some point, Kelton changed into a hoodie and then went to the front office to call his mother to pick him up. Together, Kelton and his mother left school for the weekend.
Durham Communications, you're on a recorded line.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I were just taking a walk, and there's this house that just sold at 4123 Trotter Ridge. So we look in the windows, really nice house. We walk around the back, and there's a lady lying asleep. We think she's asleep, but anyway, she was lying behind the house on the ground, right behind the house. It's exactly 2 blocks before Jordan High.
When the police arrived at the scene and discovered Tierra's body, it was immediately clear that she was deceased. Responders quickly secured the area and established a crime scene. The level of violence indicated at the crime scene left no doubt as to the severity of the crime, prompting authorities to gather evidence meticulously, including the blood patterns and the messages burned into the property's door. The horrific and tragic scene lit a fire in the bellies of the detectives, who became hell-bent on finding whoever had committed such an act of brutality. But first, the detectives needed to identify Tierra. At the crime scene, the police found a pink phone case and black earphones, but there was no phone accompanying them. So, they kept searching. The police then found a slip of paper partially protruding from Tierra's back pocket. This was a hall pass from her high school, authorizing her to leave class on the 27th of March 2015, with a signature in blue ink but no name. Investigators then reached out to the school for more information. They spoke with the assistant principal, informing him of the murder and revealing that the victim was a student at his school. The police then began to look at the surveillance footage at the school. The assistant principal and the detectives sifted through the camera footage, starting at lunchtime on the day of the murder, looking for a young black girl wearing grey sweatpants and an Elmo t-shirt. They then identified a possible match, so they followed her movements on the camera. They followed her, and a minute later, she walked to the stairwell, and that was when the quality of the image was clear enough to determine that she was the victim. Tierra Hall. The police went to Tierra's home to inform her mother of the tragic news, and with that, Tierra's mother was torn to pieces and her world came to a standstill. Despite her grief, she was able to provide officers with vital information. She shared her daughter's mobile phone number, enabling the police to track the phone's last known locations to determine its position. While canvassing the neighbourhood, a female witness came forward, telling the police that she heard a female screaming on the day of Friday the 27th of March. The police then heard that neighbours had home security systems. Detectives began reviewing the footage, and they noticed a young black man walking alone down the road, with a young woman following him around 25 metres behind. Meanwhile, other investigators were reviewing the school surveillance footage. Investigators tracked Tierra's movements until she encountered a young black man wearing a red top, loose blue pants, and a chain around his neck and dreadlocks. He was identified as Kelton Fox. The police watched Kelton on the footage and saw that he entered the bathroom, possibly to wash blood off of his hands. The police swabbed the bathroom where he washed his hands and identified Tierra's DNA. The story was quickly coming together, and the evidence was stacking. The police believed that they now knew who the killer was. On Tuesday the 31st of March 2015, the police believed they had enough evidence to arrest Kelton, so at 11 o'clock, they arrested him for first-degree murder. The police noted that when they asked why he thought he was being arrested, he answered in a strange way. He just mumbled and said, "One of my friends is gone." According to the police, he seemed disinterested, with no fear, panic, or remorse. On the other hand, Kelton's mother broke down instantly with the news. When interviewed, his mother described the scene when she told Kelton that Tierra was dead on the Sunday prior. According to her, when she broke the news, he was devastated. His reaction was of deep distress. When Kelton was interviewed by the police, he started with a lie, saying that he never left the school. But the police knew that he was lying, and they instantly confronted him with the footage. When they searched Kelton's home, they found a green knife sheath with writing all over it. The writing said, "Savage." Upon closer inspection, the police found blood on the sheath. Inside his bedroom, they also found graffiti-style artwork on paper, saying, "King K the Savage," matching the sign at the scene. They also found his journals, which pointed to a possible motive. When the police interviewed Kelton further, they took photographs of the clothing he was wearing. The police were completely surprised when they noticed that his black and white Adidas shoes had spots of blood on them. This blood was tested, and the DNA matched to Tierra. Kelton was charged in the interview room with first-degree murder and placed in jail to await trial. At Kelton's first court appearance, the judge informed him that he could face the death penalty if he was convicted for first-degree murder. However, the public defender, Lawrence Campbell, quietly reminded the court that Kelton was just 17, and therefore he was not eligible for capital punishment due to his age. The judge then acknowledged this and stated that life imprisonment would be the maximum penalty. Though there was insufficient evidence to prove premeditation, the detectives voiced concerns, suspecting that the attack on Tierra may have been calculated. However, given Kelton's age and lack of solid proof for first-degree murder, the prosecution extended a plea deal for second-degree murder. Kelton Fox agreed to the plea deal to avoid a jury trial. His defense team also cited multiple mitigating factors to the case, including a traumatic upbringing, exposure to domestic violence, and ongoing mental health issues. Court records referenced a diagnosis of PTSD, as well as signs of borderline personality disorder, hallucinations, and paranoia, suggesting that Kelton had been unstable for some time. In the end, on Tuesday the 14th of June 2014, at the age of 20, Kelton was given his sentence. He was given 12 to 15 years in prison. Under the terms of his plea deal, Kelton Fox may walk free as early as in his 30s, with the opportunity to rebuild his life outside of prison. There is currently no clear evidence that Kelton Fox has ever expressed remorse or regret for the murder of Tierra Hall. During the court proceedings, he admitted to the killing, but he showed little emotion. This outcome stands in stark contrast to Tierra Hall's fate. Her life was brutally cut short, leaving her family and friends to grieve the future she will never have. The courts put away a very dangerous man, but ultimately, was it for enough time? This case takes place in Sydney, Australia, in the year 2013. Meet Daniel Kelsall. Daniel was a 20-year-old man who lived in the north of Sydney, in an area called Neutral Bay. This area is known for its tranquil setting, a rather nice and affluent part of Sydney. However, Daniel was actually born in New Zealand, in a place just outside of Wellington. He was adopted at birth and was brought up in an upper-middle-class home. According to some sources, Daniel had a very good childhood. His parents loved and cared for him deeply, and as far as I can tell, nothing out of the ordinary happened to him. He was never in trouble, and by all accounts, those who knew him described him as a good kid. Although, as he got older, he struggled with some anger issues, and could sometimes become enraged. It is reported that Daniel suffered from depression when growing up. Shortly after finishing school, he went to study hospitality at Welltech. Those who encountered Daniel described him as rather strange. He was what many considered to be a geek who lacked social skills, and would sometimes say some rather strange things, but for the most part, many viewed him as harmless. One family friend would later say that Daniel's parents spared no expense on his school fees, hobbies, and summer holidays. They stated that he was offered every opportunity at life. Another person who knew Daniel during his formative years would say, "I do recall moments when his mood would just suddenly turn and he could be quick-tempered. But he did this strange thing where he would go around asking everyone for hugs. It was very odd." Growing up, Daniel would see some mental health professionals from time to time. It is reported that he was diagnosed with autism. However, I will touch upon this later on in the video, as the diagnosis would prove to show just how cold, calculated, and twisted Daniel really is, as the diagnosis wasn't what it seemed. It would be in 2012, when Daniel was around 19, that he and his family made the move to Sydney, Australia. The family acquired a property in Neutral Bay. Neutral Bay is an incredibly beautiful part of Sydney, home to many wealthy families. It has a low crime rate and is known to be a great and safe place to raise a family. Upon moving to Sydney, Daniel began looking for work. He eventually found a job at the Sydney Cooking School, where he was hired as a cleaner. But Daniel also had cooking experience, and so he would also learn and cook at the school. Those who worked at the cooking school would notice something about Daniel. When Daniel started, he made a point to tell everyone that he had autism, and that he had been diagnosed. He would also speak to them in an odd manner. He would repeatedly ask people the same questions over and over again, almost like he was trying to mimic someone with autism. However, one thing did not sit right. People with autism usually struggle with eye contact. Daniel would stare dead into the eyes of people when he was talking to them. In Sydney, Daniel would continue speaking to therapists. He told them all about his new job, working with knives. During these mental health therapy sessions, he would open up about something that was on his mind, a terrible foreshadowing of what was to come. He explained that he was having intrusive thoughts about killing people with a knife on the way home at night. He even told them that late one night, he took a knife home with him from the Sydney Cooking School, hoping to use it on someone whilst he was walking home. However, according to Daniel, he didn't meet anyone that night. But Daniel would continue to describe how he wanted to kill someone for the thrill of it. He went on to say that these thoughts always included a knife, and that the victim would be a total stranger. Now, what would you do in such a situation? Would you report these conversations in hopes of preventing a possible murder? I am sure that many of you would. But in this instance, the therapists did nothing. This would be a tragic lack of action which could have prevented a terrible and gruesome crime. On the 7th of September 2013, Daniel was scheduled to work a shift at the Sydney Cooking School. That day was relatively nondescript. The school had hosted a birthday party, where some women had come in and learned how to cook a meal before sitting down and eating it together. Following the event, Daniel was tasked with cleaning up and locking the venue, and so Daniel did just that. But before leaving, he slipped a knife into his satchel. Daniel then left the venue and made his way to a convenience store, but as he did so, he spotted someone, a 31-year-old man named Morgan Huxley. Morgan was a business owner who resided in Sydney. He was described as a handsome, charming and kind man who was fun to be around. He worked hard with his business, which involved building boat sheds in the Sydney area. He had just landed a big deal, which would promise him some good returns. For the most part, things were good for Morgan, and on this day, the 7th of September, Morgan had attended an engagement party in Lane Cove for his best friend. The night went very well, and he was a little intoxicated. When it came time to go home, Morgan shared a taxi with his best friend, Chris. Chris and his fiancée lived just round the corner from him. Morgan wasn't ready for the night to end. He wanted to stay out just a little longer. So he asked his friend and his friend's fiancée if they wanted to stay up and go for a couple more drinks. However, the couple were tired and they wanted to go home. They declined his request. Morgan was fine with this, and so he exited the taxi and made his way to the convenience store where he would catch the attention of Daniel Kelsall. During this time, Morgan was wearing no shoes as he had left them at the engagement party by accident. Morgan went to this convenience store to withdraw some cash from an ATM. According to Daniel, Morgan turned to him and asked him if he needed to use the machine too. Daniel said no. With this, Morgan left the convenience store and began walking towards the Oaks Hotel pub in Sydney's Neutral Bay. He sat alone at a small table in the front of the pub and drank a schooner of beer. Standing outside watching was Daniel. He would later be seen on CCTV just lurking and observing Morgan through a window, waiting. The time was around 1 a.m. Morgan sat drinking his beverage and checking his text messages on his mobile phone. Morgan had messaged one of his friends named Rebecca. The two were supposed to meet that night. He was writing her to apologize for not being at the pub earlier to meet her. He explained that he was drunk and had lost all track of time at the party. Morgan sat on the stool that night, enjoying his beer, blissfully unaware that Daniel Kelsall was standing just meters away from him, stalking him. Morgan then lifted the glass one more time, finishing the drink. He then exited the venue. Daniel would then later be seen on CCTV, coincidentally also moving when Morgan got up to leave. As Morgan began walking home, Daniel followed him, even running to catch him up. Morgan didn't live too far away. He was in a drunken state, and because of this drunken state, he didn't notice Daniel following him and lurking. As Morgan entered his home, it is believed that he left the front door unlocked by accident. As he walked in, he put on a pair of running shoes. As I said earlier, he was barefoot before, due to leaving the shoes at the party, so it is believed that Morgan actually intended to go back out and continue the night. While Morgan was inside his home, Daniel waited outside, watching and observing. However, it seems that Morgan may have changed his mind shortly after. Morgan left his bedroom door open and opened a window to his bedroom before laying face down on his bed and falling asleep. Morgan also had a housemate, a woman named Jean. Jean awoke in the middle of the night upon feeling a draft coming into her room. This was because Morgan had opened his window. Jean got up and she closed her bedroom door. Just moments later, she heard the sound of someone knocking at the front door of the home. Jean was expecting her boyfriend that night. However, her boyfriend had a key to the property, so she assumed that whoever was knocking was not her boyfriend. And with this, Jean went back to sleep. Stood at the door knocking was of course Daniel. When no one answered the knocks at the door, Daniel used his clothing to cover his hand to avoid any fingerprints being left on the knob. He opened the door and entered the property. As Daniel walked towards the bedrooms, he noticed that one of the doors was open. This room belonged to Morgan, who at this time was fast asleep on his bed. Daniel entered and saw Morgan face down on the bed. He got on top of him and began removing his clothing before touching Morgan's privates. This then caused Morgan to wake up. As Daniel looked upon Morgan on the bed as he awoke, he took the knife from his satchel and raised it above his head. He then proceeded to stab Morgan over and over again. He stabbed Morgan around 30 times in the head, neck, and back. He did this with such force that when he plunged the blade into Morgan's head, a part of the knife broke off into his skull. Daniel then put the blade back into his bag, grabbed Morgan's mobile phone, and exited his property. Despite being stabbed in the head, Morgan was still alive. He was able to muster up the strength to get off of his bed and crawl towards Jean's bedroom. As Morgan got to his own doorway, he let out a number of groans. These groans awoke Morgan's housemate, Jean. Jean came out of the bedroom to see what the noise was. She turned towards Morgan's room and looked down. Seeing her friend lying there in a pool of blood with extreme injuries all over his body, Jean immediately called for help. The paramedics instructed her on how to perform CPR. She did this as she waited for help to arrive. Meanwhile, Daniel walked home and disposed of his clothing and the knife that he had used in the attack. The paramedics soon arrived on the scene and Morgan was taken to hospital, but shortly after arriving, he tragically passed away from his injuries. The police arrived at the scene and an investigation was soon underway. Investigators quickly found Morgan's last movements. He was at the local pub and they began to gather CCTV footage around the area. And what they found left them shocked and disturbed. On the footage, they found a man who was clearly following Morgan, someone who was even watching him through the window. Investigators knew that whoever this man was, he at least knew something. They noticed that the man following Morgan appeared to be wearing chef's clothing, which gave them a lead. So the investigators looked at restaurants in the local area, asking those who worked there if they recognized the man in the CCTV footage. They ended up inquiring in the Sydney cooking school. Someone who worked there confirmed that they knew who it was in the footage. They told them it was Daniel Kelsall. Investigators were then given an address, so they went to Daniel's home in hopes of speaking to him about the gruesome murder. Upon seeing Daniel, the investigators were rather taken aback. They didn't believe that such a person would be capable of the crime. However, they of course needed to go through this line of inquiry before ruling him out. Daniel was taken to the station where he was questioned by the police, and there he confirmed that it was indeed him in the video footage.
You called him No Shoes.
No, not to his face. No, that's what.
No, sorry, but that's what you said to us.
The name that I had for the person
Correct.
was, No Shoes.
No Shoes. Have you ever seen him before?
No.
Never?
Not to my knowledge.
Sorry?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, it's possible that I may have walked like,
Sure.
cross paths.
But you don't know him?
No.
Why'd you jog?
It's cold. Mum always tells me if you're cold, go for a jog.
How far did you jog for?
Not very far.
How far is not very far?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. From the lights, a little bit after the lights, to a little bit before the opening to the restaurant, the Oaks restaurant. I might be the only person to tell you where my boss was as well, but I'm not very good at remembering things.
Sorry, you're not very good at remembering things.
Not fine details, no.
Where you were, over here on Bimboyd Road, and then you've indicated you've sort of walked back up Military Road, across Watson. If you're cold, I'm just wondering why you would go that way. That doesn't look like the most direct route.
I don't know. I don't, when I get tired, I don't really pay attention to a lot of things. I think it was because I wanted to check in at work, the front of work.
Did you have a bag with you?
Yes, this one.
Thank you. And it's that particular bag?
Yes, this one.
So that's what is it? Phillips Fox with was it South Africa?
South African soccer team.
Is that the World Cup?
Yes, I believe it's the Visa. It's a World Cup leopard.
And do you recall what you would have had in that particular bag?
I would have had a apron.
Yes.
My box of Yu-Gi-Oh trading cards.
Of your what, sorry?
Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game.
Okay.
And that would be it. I might have had a food item, but I'm not too sure.
You've indicated that you have autism, is that correct?
Yes.
What do you mean? What sort?
It hasn't been classified because it was caught so late on in life that I've already adjusted to having it. I haven't taken any concrete tests by my psychologist. I have seen a psychologist, and I've been diagnosed with this. I don't actually know what specific level on the autism scale it is, but it does impede some functioning in everyday life.
Like what?
I can't tell balance. I can't tell measurement of any kind. So measurement of time, measurement of object, in any type of measurement, I can't instinctively tell. Even after, so I can't, like, a pinch of salt, I can't do a same pinch of salt. So you ask me to do 2 pinches of salt, they will not be the same. You ask me to guess your measurement, I would not be able to at all. I wouldn't be able to say you're about this height because I just can't tell.
Daniel said that he had seen Morgan when walking home. He had noticed that he was wearing no shoes. He said he briefly spoke to him at an ATM, but the conversation was short. Daniel was then shown footage of himself lurking outside the pub, and then some footage of him running towards Morgan. They asked him to explain 2 things. 1. Why was he lurking around for Morgan outside the pub? And 2. Why did he run after him when he left the pub? Daniel claimed that he had a bad memory, especially when he was tired, and that he ran towards Morgan because his mother told him to go for a jog if he was ever cold. The police found these responses rather strange. There was some fingerprints and DNA recovered from the crime scene, so the police asked Daniel if he could provide DNA samples and fingerprints so they would be able to cross-reference the evidence. But Daniel refused. Daniel explained that he had never entered Morgan's home and that he knew nothing about the murder. With no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, Daniel was free to go. However, the police believed that they had found their man. More work just needed to be done. After the police interview, Daniel was scheduled to work. When he got to work, his boss asked him if the police had spoken to him, as they had just been at the Sydney cooking school in connection to Morgan's murder. Daniel told his boss that he had nothing to do with the murder, but then said that if he had killed Morgan, the police would never, ever find out. The police got back to work, desperately trying to solve this horrific crime. However, only days later, the police received a call from Daniel. Daniel informed them that he had not been entirely honest during the interview, and he asked the police to meet him in a car park. The police agreed, and they met with Daniel. In this car park, Daniel told the investigators a different story. He now told them that he had indeed entered Morgan's home, but that Morgan had invited him in. He said that the two entered the bedroom, where he began to consensually touch Morgan. However, he said that a woman had seen them in bed together and had gotten angry and attacked Daniel. Daniel claimed that he quickly left and that Morgan had been killed due to this. Daniel was then swiftly arrested. The police believed that he was telling a half-truth to cover the fact that the police had found DNA in the property, likely realizing that it was only a matter of time before he would be forced to give over the samples. Although there was an issue. This exchange and confession with the investigators was not recorded, and back at the station, Daniel refused to speak. Daniel's home and the Sydney cooking school were searched right away. Almost immediately, they found that one of the knives was missing. This knife would never be found, even to this day. Police then found a bag in Daniel's room, the very same bag that Daniel had worn at the time he was seen on CCTV during the night of the murder, the bag which he had also worn in the police interview. Blood was found on the bag. The blood was tested, and there was a DNA match. The blood belonged to Morgan Huxley, which of course means that Daniel walked into the police station carrying a bag with the blood of his victim soaked into the fabric. Fingerprints were also found in Morgan's home that belonged to Daniel. And finally, DNA belonging to Daniel was found on Morgan's genitals. It is not clear if this happened before or after the stabbing, or both. And when searching his computer, the police found indecent images of cartoons involving minors. The police had what they needed. Daniel Kelsall was charged with the murder of Morgan Huxley. Following his arrest, Daniel was in a room with the investigators. It is here where he said something incredibly shocking. Daniel turned to one of the investigators and said, "Pardon the pun, but you could cut the tension in this room with a knife." It was clear to the police that Daniel was enjoying every moment of this. He enjoyed the attention. The police were also able to obtain the conversations he had had with his therapist, where he spoke about wanting to follow someone home at random and kill them with a knife. The case was becoming concrete. Before the trial could commence, Daniel's mental health needed to be assessed. When this assessment came, Daniel sat down and told the mental health expert that he had autism, and proceeded to list his symptoms of the condition. However, despite listing these symptoms, the expert noticed that Daniel seemed to be making an effort to act autistic, almost like he was trying to play a role, like he was trying to convince her that he truly did have the condition. Although the expert didn't buy it, Daniel was ruled as knowing right from wrong, a strong understanding of people's emotions, and they believed that he was lying about his diagnosis. Daniel was ruled as fit to stand trial, and was considered by the expert to be incredibly dangerous. It then came to light that Daniel had tried to do something similar to someone else. Before killing Morgan, Daniel had stalked another man home. However, the man noticed that Daniel was following him, and so he confronted him, causing Daniel to flee. When Daniel was arrested and the media ran stories, the man recognized him and came forward to the police. It became apparent just how dangerous Daniel truly was. The trial would soon begin. Again, Daniel seemed to enjoy the trial. It was clear to many that Daniel was a full-blown narcissist. During the trial, Daniel took to the stand. He denied murder, and when speaking about that night, he claimed he spoke to Morgan, saying that he had a stressful week. Daniel then told the court that Morgan had invited him into his home to continue talking. He then claimed that they both walked into Morgan's bedroom, where he fondled Morgan for around 10 minutes consensually, until he felt something hit him on the head really hard and noticed someone else in the room. According to Daniel, Morgan and a woman began to argue, so he just stood up and ran out of the property. Daniel then explained that he lied to the police about having gone to Morgan's home because he was scared of having anything to do with the murder. While Daniel gave his version of events, the court gasped as he told these lies. And again, Daniel seemed to enjoy the discomfort that he was giving to the court. The prosecution then gave their evidence, that Morgan's blood was found on Daniel's bag, and that he told his therapists that he wanted to kill a random person. During the trial, it also came to light that Morgan used to buy his morning coffees from the cafe at the front of the premises of the Sydney Cooking School, which is of course where Daniel used to work. It is possible that Daniel may have set his sights on Morgan for some time. Ultimately, Daniel was found guilty and was sentenced to a minimum term of 30 years in prison. However, it is believed that Daniel may never be released due to how dangerous he is. And then, later on in a different trial, Daniel was found guilty of possessing the computer-generated CP images. However, during the sentencing, the judge said that he saw no benefit to the community in extending his sentence, so no further jail time was added. When speaking about the case of Morgan Huxley, the police have said that if Daniel had not been caught, he would have gone on to kill others. It seemed that Daniel portrayed himself as someone with autism, perhaps to create a persona for himself so he could become an unsuspecting serial killer, making himself appear like a harmless, eccentric person. Those who have treated Daniel following his arrest have stated that he is incredibly smart, cold, and calculated. Some have even said that he is the most frightening individual they have ever met. This case takes place in the United States of America on the 16th of April, 2005. Esteban Carpio was a 26-year-old father who lived in Rhode Island. In the lead up to this case, those who knew Esteban stated that he was acting different than usual. He started talking to himself and had told his girlfriend that someone he knew had done some kind of voodoo ritual targeted towards him and that he was now scared. His girlfriend took him to a Buddhist temple where a monk blessed a string that Esteban tied around his waist to drive away the devil and evil spirits. Esteban also had an extensive criminal record, including numerous arrests for fighting and weapons charges, although most of his arrests did not result in convictions. On the 16th of April 2005, Esteban dropped off his girlfriend for a job interview in a red van. After dropping her off, he drove away and planned to return later to pick her back up. But as Esteban was driving, he came across an 84-year-old woman named Madeline Gatter, who was just standing in front of her home. He saw this as an opportunity to exploit a vulnerable, elderly woman. He pulled over the van, covered his face with a hat and scarf, and then got out of his vehicle and approached Madeline with the intention of robbing her. Realizing what was about to happen, Madeline panicked and began screaming for help. As she did, she felt what she described as a powerful punch to her back. The force was such that she fell to the ground. Esteban then fled from the scene. He got back into his red van and sped away, but as he did, a member of the public spotted the van and made a note of the registration number. The forceful blow that Madeline had felt to her back wasn't from a punch. Esteban had plunged a knife into her back. Those who heard the commotion came to her aid and began helping her. Paramedics were called and she was rushed to the hospital. The police were informed of what happened and were given the vehicle description and registration. Meanwhile, Esteban sent a message to his girlfriend and told her that somebody else needed to pick her up. Frustrated with this change of plan, she demanded that he return at once to the location and pick her up. Esteban, still in the red van, came back to pick up his girlfriend. Once she was inside the car, Esteban stated that he needed to go back home and swap the vehicles. Meanwhile, the police were on the hunt for the red van. Pretty quickly, the van was able to be identified. The vehicle was a rental and had been loaned out in Esteban's girlfriend's name. Officers were able to see that he was also registered to drive the van, and an address was found. Officers turned up to the house and Esteban's girlfriend answered the door. They asked her if she had any idea where Esteban was, and she replied by telling them that she had no idea. But this was a lie. Esteban was inside the home. The officers identified themselves and informed him that they needed to speak with him at once. Eventually, Esteban's girlfriend told him that the police detectives were here to help him, and shortly after arriving, the police arrested him and brought him into the station for questioning. By all accounts, officers recalled that he seemed to be calm and not aggressive at all. Esteban was escorted into the station and questioned. His handcuffs were removed and questions began. One of the detectives was a man named James L. Allen. He was 55 years old and had been on the force for 27 years. Esteban told the detectives that his name was Brasilino Carr and that he had never been in trouble with the law before. He then said that he was a barber and had been working in the barbershop all day. All of these things were untrue. Detective Allen told Esteban that they knew he was lying. He said, "We know who you are, and you are in serious trouble." Once they informed Esteban that they knew he was trying to be deceitful, they noticed that he became more agitated and anxious. A few minutes into the interrogation, Esteban told the two detectives that he was thirsty and needed a glass of water. Detective Allen stayed put, whilst his colleague, Detective McGann, got up to grab him a glass of water, leaving Esteban and Detective Allen alone in the room together. When Detective McGann came back, there were sounds of shouting and a violent struggle. He tried to open the door, but the door was locked from the inside. Detective McGann began shouting and asked what was going on inside. He received no response. He desperately tried to break down the door until he heard the sounds of several gunshots. Officers then gathered outside the door, waiting for someone from the inside of the room to emerge. They drew their weapons in anticipation. A couple of officers were then ordered to retrieve a door ram to break in the door. They returned and swiftly made several attempts to break through the door. Once they were able to get inside, Esteban was nowhere to be seen. Detective Allen, however, was lying on the ground with a gunshot wound to his face. He was quickly rushed to the hospital. Officers then began looking for Esteban. He had gone through the adjoining office, shot out the window, and jumped from 3 stories. He then fled from the scene on foot. Detective Allen's gun was found on the ground below the broken window. Several witnesses outside heard the sounds of gunfire and glass shattering. They saw Esteban jump from the window and run away from the scene. Esteban then made his way to a friend's house. This friend would later say that he seemed to be acting anxious. He refused to tell this friend what was wrong and instead asked if they would order him a taxi to New York. They also noted that Esteban was bleeding from his hands and kept muttering to himself. The friend did call a taxi service on behalf of Esteban. However, the taxi driver found the call to be rather suspicious. The taxi dispatcher had just warned about a shooting in the local area and that all drivers should be alert. This driver then stated that a woman had ordered a taxi for a man who was willing to pay a driver $500 to take him to New York. The taxi driver approached a police officer and told them that he believed a call had just come in that involved the person they were looking for and that he was on his way to go and pick him up. Officers followed behind the taxi to the pickup location. The taxi driver pulled up to the pickup point and Esteban came out, approached the vehicle and stood outside. He stared at the driver for a couple of seconds, but upon realizing what was going on, Esteban fled from the scene and officers began to chase him. They were able to catch up, but Esteban resisted arrest, and a violent fight ensued with a number of officers. They were able to bring him down to the ground, and Esteban was handcuffed and taken to hospital. Tragically, on the 17th of April, Detective Allen passed away from his injuries. Madeline also had some issues at the hospital. Her wound had become infected and it struggled to heal, but thankfully she was released after 2 days in hospital. Police began to question Esteban. He claimed that one of his friends made him crazy and that they had performed some voodoo ritual and cursed him. He said he couldn't remember anything before being arrested and put down the chaos to being influenced by the devil. Esteban then admitted that he had grabbed Detective Allen's gun after a struggle and had locked the door from the inside. He claimed he had done this because he believed the detective wanted to kill him. Esteban acknowledged that he had taken Detective Allen's gun and said that he had to kill him. Esteban was assessed by a number of mental health professionals. 2 doctors who assessed him believed that he was not fit to stand trial and said that he was clearly showing signs of severe mental health issues. They stated that he was suffering from schizophrenia form psychosis and an acute onset of paranoid psychosis. They concluded that he should not be charged with murder due to diminished responsibility. However, the state also provided 2 other mental health professionals. They both claimed that he was not suffering from a mental disease or defect that would have impaired his judgment, and his arraignment would soon be held.
Step off.
Not guilty! No, I'm not guilty! Both of them!
guilty, Stephen!
It's gross police brutality. He was mentally ill, and he needed help, and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried, and he didn't deserve.
As you could see, Esteban was in a horrendous state. The official story was that these injuries were sustained after he fell 3 stories from the police window and during resisting arrest. Family members of Esteban were deeply disturbed and enraged to see him in this condition. The spit shield mask that Esteban was wearing was allegedly used because his face was bleeding and oozing, and he could possibly try to spit on officers. They were concerned that he would become combative, and quote, "The department decided to take maximum precautions and place him in the spit shield," although family members believed that the mask was used to hide the full extent of Esteban's injuries and to make him appear more sinister. The family also complained that he was a victim of police brutality. The FBI conducted a month-long review of the department's handling of the case and found no civil rights violations. They found that these injuries were due to him jumping from the balcony just like the official story had stated, and that he had tried fighting with officers during his arrest. Officials said, "If he's fighting with police officers, the officers have a right to use whatever means necessary to subdue the suspect." The trial would begin in 2006. Esteban told the court that he was unable to control himself on the night at the police station when he killed Sergeant Allen with his gun. He also began to cry when he addressed Allen's family. He said, "I am truly sorry for what has happened to the victims and the victims' families." The defense presented 2 doctors who had ruled Esteban to be unfit to stand trial and pushed for an insanity defense. They also called upon Esteban's girlfriend. She testified that she had become increasingly worried about Esteban's mental health in the lead up to the murder taking place. She said that she and his family were desperate to get him the help he needed, but they were unable to. She mentioned how he had started talking to himself and that he believed that voodoo was involved. She also said that he seemed to be suffering from a mental breakdown and was having trouble sleeping. The prosecution then presented their doctor's evidence to suggest that all of this was untrue and that he knew exactly what he was doing. The jury found Esteban to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of all counts. At the sentencing hearing, Esteban said, "I was doing all right until one day I woke up and there was something wrong with me." The judge then handed down the sentence and said, "The murder of a police officer is committed by an individual with a history of assaultive misconduct and who has stabbed a gentle, frail elderly woman in the back. Life in prison is a fitting sentence." The judge imposed the harshest sentence under the law, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge stated that to allow Esteban even the possibility of parole would be antithetical in a civilized society. Since being incarcerated, Esteban has attempted to appeal his sentence a number of times.
The man convicted of killing a Providence police detective with his own service weapon is going to federal court to try and get a new trial. Esteban Carpio is currently serving a life sentence for Detective James Allen's murder more than a decade ago. Eyewitness News reporter Caroline Goggin joins us live from the Providence Mobile Newsroom with more on Carpio's latest appeal. Caroline?
Well, Shannon, in this 15-page court document, Carpio asked the court to vacate his conviction and grant him a new trial. Another attempt by a convicted Rhode Island cop killer to clear his name. Esteban Carpio is currently serving life without parole in a Connecticut prison. He was found guilty for the 2005 murder of Providence Police Detective James Allen.
Every day, I face the facts of what I did and what happened.
In this latest filing, Carpio claims the state denied him due process during that trial. He says he was suffering from mental illness and lacked criminal responsibility when he killed Detective Allen inside police headquarters. He also claims his trial lawyer wasn't familiar with state law, proving ineffective counsel. But this isn't the first time he's attempted to appeal his conviction. According to documents, he filed an appeal and an application for post-conviction relief in 2012. Both were denied.
The murder of my husband was a cold and deliberate action. The jury found that Esteban Carpio was not insane at the time of the crime.
During his trial in 2006, 2 expert witnesses said Carpio was suffering from schizophrenia at the time of the killing and couldn't be held responsible. But the state's witnesses said the man was an antisocial criminal. The jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted Carpio of first-degree murder. Now, he hopes to see the courtroom once again.
As of right now, Esteban is still behind bars, and it's likely that's where he will spend the rest of his life. This case takes place in Australia in the year 2016. In February of 2016, 2 young backpackers, Beatrice and Leigh, embarked on what they believed would be an unforgettable journey across Australia. But this once-in-a-lifetime adventure, however, took a horrific turn. Meet Leigh. At the time of this case beginning, Leigh was a 23-year-old backpacker from Germany. Leigh had often dreamed of visiting the country of Australia. It was something that she had wanted to do for some time. So at some point in 2016, Leigh decided to embark on a journey to the country. Her plans were to explore as much of Australia as possible, to experience the diverse landscapes and the culture. Ironically, Leigh ended up watching the movie Wolf Creek. This is something that a lot of backpackers do before visiting Australia. For those who don't know, this is a movie where backpackers are travelling through Australia when they are attacked and murdered by a madman in the middle of nowhere. Leigh watched this movie with a friend, and when it finished, the friend voiced their concern about such a thing happening in real life. However, Leigh assured him that this was just a work of pure fiction, but it was actually indeed inspired by true events. Leigh arrived in Australia, and at some point she found herself in a hostel in Adelaide, a city in southern Australia. Hostels are the usual spots where fellow backpackers can meet each other, and it's at this hostel where Leigh met a woman by the name of Beatrice. Beatrice was a fellow 23-year-old backpacker from Brazil. Due to them being a similar age and of course travelling Australia, they got along well and had much in common. The two quickly developed a friendship. As the two conversed, they realised that they were both planning to do the same trip. Both women wanted to drive from Adelaide to Melbourne, with the intention of experiencing the scenic Great Ocean Road. Driving from Adelaide to Melbourne via the Great Ocean Road is a journey covering approximately 1,000 kilometres, or around 620 miles. If driven non-stop, this route would take anyone around 13 to 14 hours. However, most people take around 5 days to complete the trip, camping along the way and taking in the views. The two had an idea. Why not go on this trip together? And so they began to plan. However, there was an issue. Neither of them had a vehicle. Now, it's common in Australia for people to go to various sites such as Facebook or Gumtree and post an advert seeking all manner of things: employment, advice, or travel companions. The two friends made use of these sites for this purpose. They shared on these sites that they were 2 young girls looking to do the Ocean Road trip to Melbourne, seeking someone with a car who would be willing to take them soon. Perhaps someone was already planning this route, and this way they could share on the petrol money. The girls got some replies. A man who was close to their age replied. This man told the 2 girls that they would be welcome to join him as he would soon be taking the journey. Everything was set. That was until there was an unexpected hiccup in this plan. The man who had intended on joining them instead had to cancel, because at the last minute he had some car troubles. This unexpected change led them to consider alternative options. They had to go back to the drawing board, so the 2 women decided to look at the other responses they had gotten from the advertisement. The only person willing to help them on this trip was a 59-year-old man by the name of Roman Hines. The girls spoke to Roman. They felt that something was a little off. Roman could be rather abrupt when communicating with the girls via text, but they chalked this up to just his age. Roman would also pressure the girls. If they didn't respond fast enough, he would double and triple text them, telling them not to waste his time. But the 2 girls had no other options, and so they accepted his offer for a ride. The 9th of February 2016 was the day that the two women had planned to meet Roman. They agreed on a meeting spot and made their way to the destination, and Roman was there waiting for them. The three said hi and placed their bags into his boot and then entered his vehicle. They then set off on their journey. But they had no idea that they had just entered the car of one of Australia's most dangerous men. Roman Hines was born in West Germany and migrated to Australia in 1959 with his parents and his older brothers. He married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce, and he had 5 children. Roman was known to be violent and had anger issues. He even had a disturbing criminal past. A criminal past that should have had him monitored at all times by the police, especially his online activities. What I'm about to share with you is beyond infuriating. On one occasion in 2014, Roman had given a woman a ride from Adelaide in his car. When they were in a secluded area, he forced himself upon the woman. Roman was found guilty but was later placed on a good behaviour bond with specific conditions. He was no longer allowed to use an electronic device to arrange personal contact with other people. However, in December of 2014, he breached this bond and attacked another woman. Despite this, it doesn't seem that he served any jail time, or at least I can't find it online. But something else happened just a month before the trip with Beatrice and Lena. Roman had an ex-girlfriend, a woman named Sylvia Clark. Just a month before Roman would meet the two women, Sylvia was staying over at his home. One night, she woke up to find her left hand tied to the bed. Terrified, Sylvia looked around the room. Stood over her was Roman. Roman proceeded to beat her and bite her. He then forcibly attempted to separate her legs. Sylvia felt too scared to resist, so she allowed Roman to do what he wanted. Following this attack, she ended their relationship and cancelled a planned camping trip to a place called Salt Creek. Sadly, Sylvia was so embarrassed and ashamed of what happened to her that she didn't go to the police. This is the type of person who Roman is, and now he had 2 young girls in his car with him all alone. The 3 were making some progress on their way to Melbourne, when all of a sudden, without asking, Roman made an unexpected turn, a turn towards Salt Creek. Salt Creek is a small settlement located in southern Australia, approximately 164 kilometres away from Adelaide. Those who enter should be well prepared when visiting. Salt Creek is considered to be extremely remote, a place for a depraved individual like Roman to carry out his twisted fantasies. Roman pulled up and told the girls that they would be setting up camp there for the night. The girls were confused. Not a single person was in sight. However, the drive so far had been pleasant, and Roman had been patient with the girls when they wanted to stop and take photographs, so to some degree they felt at ease. Roman began setting up the camp for the 2 girls. He was quiet, but rather strange. The girls weren't too worried, but they did feel that something was slightly off. Beatrice began helping him set up the camp for the night, but Lena was tired, so she decided to sleep for a little bit inside the car. When Lena was sleeping, Roman spoke with Beatrice. He explained that he had noticed some kangaroo footprints in the sand. He said that if she wanted to snap some photographs of the kangaroos, he would be able to track them and find them for her. Trusting his local knowledge and believing it was just part of the adventure, Beatrice agreed to follow him. The 2 began walking for some time into the secluded sand dunes. Minutes passed with no kangaroos anywhere in sight. Beatrice then told Roman not to worry and said that they should just return to the camp and maybe they'll see some later. But as she turned to walk back, Roman grabbed her. He wrapped his arm around her neck from behind and then pushed her to the ground. Roman had also been concealing a hammer and a knife in his pants. He also had with him some rope. Roman revealed the knife before pulling out the rope, hinting at Beatrice not to fight back. He began to tie her up, but she defied him. She attempted to grab the rope, but Roman told her that if she did resist, he would break her arms, and things would be very much worse off for her. Roman then began licking and kissing Beatrice. before continuing to essay her. She pleaded with Roman not to continue, but he didn't listen. In fact, her pleading infuriated him, and he began striking her with his fists. It was in this moment that Beatrice accepted that she may not survive this attack. However, she came up with a plan of her own. She told Roman that she actually wanted this too, and said that he could continue to do whatever he wanted to do under one condition: they return to the camp so that they wouldn't be in the open. Roman was rather taken aback, but he agreed. He got Beatrice up and began walking back to the camp with her. But as they approached the camp, Roman had a change of heart. Perhaps he realized that Beatrice was just trying to get him close enough to the camp so that Lena would be able to help. By this point, the camp was in sight, when all of a sudden, Roman began taking Beatrice again away from the camp. Realizing that this could be the end, Beatrice screamed with all of her might. She shouted for her friend Lena, hoping and praying that she would be able to help. Seconds later, Roman began viciously beating Beatrice, trying to render her unconscious. But thankfully, Lena had heard the commotion. She awoke from her slumber to blood-curdling screams. This moment must have been terrifying, but she pushed the fear to one side and jumped to action. She ran towards the direction of the scream she had heard, and before too long she saw her friend laying naked in the sand, with Roman standing over her. Upon seeing this, Lena was understandably in a state of shock. She bravely shouted, "Let her go." Roman then turned his attention towards Lena. He began walking towards her. Beatrice screamed, telling Lena to run. She shouted to be careful, as Roman had a knife. Lena ran to her car to grab her mobile phone in hopes of calling someone to help, but Roman was far faster than she anticipated. As Lena was looking in the backseat of the car for her phone, Roman snuck up behind her and struck her over the head with a hammer. The force of the strike was so great that blood instantly began pouring from her head. Lena was in a daze. In just a few moments, she had gone from sleeping to seeing her friend being essayed in front of her, and then she was struck with a hammer. The confusion she felt must have been intense. However, somehow, Lena was able to defend herself. She engaged in a desperate struggle with Roman, who at this point was in a crazed frenzy. In the struggle, Lena was hit with the hammer 3 more times, causing horrific injuries. Lena was losing a large amount of blood, but miraculously she was able to run away. As Lena was running, Roman got into his car and started his engine. Meanwhile, Lena ran towards Beatrice, making sure that she was okay. The two were now together again. Beatrice was naked and terrified, even more worried now as she could see that Lena was in a horrific state. But the two didn't have chance to speak much. They turned to see Roman driving towards them in his car. In this moment, the two instinctively decided to split up and go in separate directions. Beatrice ran and was able to hide in the bushes in the sand dunes, but Roman had spotted Lena running, and he decided to follow her. In the vehicle, Roman chased Lena as she ran. For over 1 kilometer, Lena ran for her life into the secluded dunes. She ran in a zigzag pattern to avoid ending up under Roman's tires. Roman was relentless. If she stopped for just a moment, she would die a horrifying death. She had no choice but to keep running and running. After being chased in the heat, and after sustaining horrific injuries, and after losing so much blood, Lena began to slow down. She knew that she wouldn't be able to outrun Roman in his car. It would be impossible. But she wasn't done yet. Due to the sand dunes, Roman ended up being a slight distance away from Lena as he had gotten stuck, but he was beginning to drive towards her again. Lena turned and began running towards Roman's car. She then jumped onto the bonnet and then got onto the roof. Blood was still pouring from Lena's head, so much so that it began raining down on the roof of the car. Roman began screaming, demanding that Lena come down from the roof at once. He continued driving, trying to shake her off. Meanwhile, kilometers away, Beatrice was hiding in the bushes, unaware of the fate of Lena. But then she heard a noise, the sound of a car. Beatrice realized that this was her chance. Cars don't come around this area too often. Inside the car were a bunch of young men. They were enjoying the scenic route when all of a sudden, a terrified and naked Beatrice ran into the middle of the road, trying to flag them down. Initially, the boys of course had no idea what was going on, but they allowed Beatrice into their car. It was then when Beatrice told them that a madman had essayed her and that her friend was still in danger. The police were called, but they were still far away. The men inside the car suggested driving Beatrice away to safety, but she refused. She begged the boys to head in the direction of where Roman had driven after Lena, and so they did. While they began searching for Lena, she was still on the roof of Roman's car. But then Roman came to a stop. He exited his vehicle, demanding that Lena come down. Lena agreed under one condition: he throw away his knives and hammers as far as he could. Roman then told Lena that this whole situation was silly before throwing away his weapons. Roman then appeared to be somewhat calm. This prompted Lena to get into the vehicle with him. Roman started up the car again, and the two began driving towards the campsite. Lena didn't have much strength left. She was exhausted. But then, as they were driving down the beach, Lena spotted a bunch of fishermen on the shore. This was now her chance. She put her bloody arm outside of the window and began waving frantically. The fishermen looked up to see a woman's arm hanging out of the car, covered in blood. The men were deeply disturbed. All realizing what they had to do, they leapt into their cars and began following Roman closely behind, hoping that they could save Lena. Remarkably, these brave men were able to corner Roman in his vehicle, and his car came to a complete stop. Lena opened the door and walked towards the men. Roman, realizing it was over, allowed Lena to get away. He simply just drove away, hoping to evade the police who would soon be coming for him. But most importantly, the girls were now safe, and now Roman was on the run. The police arrived on the scene, and the two women were treated for their injuries. Lena was in a horrific state. She had bravely fought Roman off for hours, all whilst having serious injuries. But she had lost an extreme amount of blood. On the way to the hospital, she lost consciousness as the doctors rushed to treat her. Meanwhile, the search for Roman was underway. A man named Adam Stewart lived in the area and owned a shop. This shop was the only one for miles and miles. Adam is incredibly familiar with the area, so the police asked him to assist in helping them to catch Roman, and Adam happily agreed. Adam had an idea where he could be, and it didn't take long until they found him. Roman's car was stuck in a sand dune. He had nowhere to go. Roman was swiftly arrested. Back at the hospital, Lena's condition improved, and her head was stapled back together. Lena was covered in so much blood and sand that when she arrived at the hospital, the doctors at first didn't know if she was a man or a woman. They could hardly see her features. The two women were then reunited in the hospital, both taking time to realize how lucky they were to be alive. Roman was then charged with a number of horrific crimes: aggravated kidnapping, indecent assault, causing harm with intent, endangering life, false imprisonment, and assault. The news of the attack, of course, spread very quickly. Roman's ex-girlfriend Sylvia saw the name Roman with a photograph of him in the papers, along with the words Salt Creek. A huge amount of guilt then took hold of Sylvia. She thought to herself that if she would have spoken out about what Roman did, then the two girls wouldn't have been attacked. However, Roman had already been arrested for similar crimes, and the justice system had failed massively. So who knows if anything would have happened to Roman if she did. Then fear washed over her, as she remembered that Roman had planned a trip to Salt Creek before they broke up. She realized that she could have been one of his victims too. The trial of Roman for the Salt Creek attacks commenced in February of 2017 and was held in the Supreme Court of South Australia. The prosecution presented the harrowing story, with the photographs of Lena's horrific injuries and the blood on the roof of Roman's car. Sylvia bravely came forward and spoke of her own story with Roman. She explained that Roman had forced himself upon her on one occasion. She even had photographs of her bruises to show. However, the judge ruled that Roman was not guilty of this crime. The judge said that no SA had taken place, which goes to show that even if she did speak up against Roman before, nothing would have happened anyway. It then came out during the trial that Roman had been using the internet to watch violent and illegal content involving women. It was clear that this was an incredibly dangerous man. His social media chat logs were then shown to the court, where it was found that he had been in contact with 12 more backpackers regarding potential lifts around Australia. Roman was a serial killer in the making. He was ultimately found guilty and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. It is likely that he will die in prison where he belongs. The girl's quick thinking and bravery saved them both that day, and it is nothing short of remarkable. Coupled with the men who jumped to action to save them when the time came. They didn't know if Roman had a gun, and they put themselves at risk for strangers. It's cases like these that do sometimes remind you that although we cover the darker side of humanity, there are at least some good people out there. However, I shall leave you with something rather chilling. Following the story coming to light, witnesses came forward. They said that months before this attack, they saw Roman Hines getting some supplies from one store in Salt Creek. He was with a young girl who was most certainly a backpacker in his passenger seat. Days later, he returned to the store on his way back to Adelaide. This time, he was alone, and there was no one in his passenger seat. As of right now, no one knows who this girl was, and it's believed that she is buried somewhere in the dunes of Salt Creek. This case takes place in Australia in the year 1989. On this day, a party was held, but what exactly transpired that night left Australia horrified and disturbed. However, there are many questions surrounding the case, leaving the victim's mother saying the following: "The way the police handled this whole case sickens me, and I have been fighting for the truth." This is the case of Leigh Leigh. Leigh was born on the 24th of July 1975. Her life wasn't easy from the start. Her parents split up when she was around 7. Due to this happening so early in her life and during her formative years, the separation was tough on her, as you can imagine. She spent a couple of years living with her grandparents. After the split of her parents, Leigh moved back in with her mother, who had met a new man. By 1989, Leigh was living in a small coastal town called Fern Bay with her mother, stepfather Brad, and her little sister. Fern Bay is located just north of Stockton in New South Wales. It was a quiet coastal suburb during the late 1980s. The area wasn't known to be unsafe. However, violent crime was increasing. Serious attacks were on the rise. In the mid-80s, there were around 1,800 violent crimes annually, and by the mid-80s, it had risen to 3,700. In 1989, Leigh was 14. She was in year 8 at school, and had a good number of friends. She loved animals, and dreamed of becoming a vet one day. She spent most of her weekends and holidays with her grandmother, who lived in Killabin Bay. According to those who knew her, that is where Leigh felt most at home. People who knew Leigh described her as a kind, typical teenage girl who was just beginning to figure herself out. She was also beginning to get to an age where she was being invited to parties where alcohol would be consumed. On the 3rd of November 1989, Leigh was invited to a birthday beach party. This event was to celebrate the 16th birthday of a boy from the local area. The party was held at the North Stockton Surf Club. Around 50 to 60 teenagers made their way to the venue that night. most of whom were in Year 10 at Newcastle High School. Leigh was at least familiar with most of the people who were present. That night, she got dressed and made her way there with some friends. Leigh arrived at the party at around 7:30 p.m. Her mother had given her permission to attend, but had also arranged to pick her up later that night at around 11 p.m. Leigh's mother was under the impression that the party would be supervised by adults, but this was not the case. The party was, for the most part, unsupervised. There were 2 older boys in attendance, Mchugh Webster and Guy Wilson. Both were 18. These 2 were acting as unofficial bouncers. They were tasked with the job of marking guests' hands to confirm their entry. Of course, it doesn't really need to be said that they were not qualified to actually do this job, and this is where things become rather disturbing. One theory in this case is that the older boys at the party planned to get a number of the young girls drunk and have their way with them. Several witnesses later told the police that Mchugh Webster had boasted that he and others planned to get Leigh and other girls drunk, and all of them would, quote, go through them. Almost every single person in attendance was under the legal drinking age, but many of the attendees consumed alcohol and marijuana. This lack of supervision and the presence of these substances set the stage for the chaotic events that unfolded. Inside the event, a band was performing. The mood was lively to say the least. Due to the immaturity of the guests and the heavy drinking, the party became out of control with fights and inappropriate behaviour as the night progressed. Leigh herself became rather intoxicated early in the evening. She was given copious amounts of whiskey and Coca-Cola. Those who were present at the event would later tell the investigators that she seemed to be visibly affected by the alcohol. Apparently, she was stumbling and was in a vulnerable state. Some even say that she struggled to stand up without any assistance. In this vulnerable state, something truly horrifying happened to Leigh, and things took a despicable turn. Now, the exact details of what happened remain unclear to this day. At some point during the night, one of 2 things happened. Leigh was either led away from the party, or she was coerced away from the party, to a secluded area in the nearby sand dunes. Either way, she was taken away from the party with sinister intentions. They wanted her somewhere where nobody would see. This person is unnamed, but they were 15 years old. After reaching the sand dunes, this 15-year-old essayed Leigh. There is some dispute about how consensual this was. Some have tried to claim that this was consensual. However, Leigh was 14, and she was incredibly drunk, to the point that she even struggled to stand up. She was essayed. Once this was over, Leigh returned to the party in a frantic state. She was deeply worried. She was scared that she might be pregnant. Those who saw Leigh when she returned later said that she was visibly upset and that there was blood on her pants in between her legs. Leigh was moaning and crying. At one point she fell on the ground and was in a lot of pain. She then shouted out the name of this boy who had taken her to the sand dunes. However, news spread around the party that Leigh had had intercourse with this boy. Some took this as a sign that they may have a chance at sleeping with her too. Guy Wilson attempted to ask Leigh if she would be interested in sleeping with him too, but Leigh rejected his advances. A group of young boys then began tormenting Leigh. The older boys, Mchugh Webster and Guy Wilson, along with other younger boys who can't be named for legal reasons, surrounded her and threw her to the ground. The group then proceeded to kick her around with their feet. They spat at her and poured beer on her head. A number of them then accused her of being a whore. According to those there were lots of people watching, and they did nothing to help. They just stood and laughed. As Leigh got up and ran away, one of the boys threw a glass bottle at her. Leigh was seen by several witnesses leaving the club, heading towards the beach at around 10:30 p.m. that night. As she was leaving, Mchugh Webber spotted Leigh, and he decided to follow her. Leigh walked alone into the sand dunes. Mchugh was closely behind. It isn't clear if Mchugh was alone or not, even to this day. But anyway, what we know is that Mchugh followed. He saw the opportunity to do the unthinkable. Once in the sand dunes, Mchugh brutally attacked Leigh in the isolated area. The specific sequence of events was pieced together from forensic evidence, along with Mchugh's confession that was obtained in a later interview. What happened next to Leigh ranks amongst one of the most horrific acts I have ever covered on this channel. As I mentioned, it is unclear if Mchugh acted alone, but allegedly, Mchugh, possibly along with others, pinned Leigh down to the ground and forced themselves upon her. It's understandable that Leigh may have tried to call out for help, and so Mchugh grabbed some sand and forced it into her mouth. This act may also reflect further dehumanization that Leigh experienced during the multiple attacks she faced. If this wasn't already enough, a broken beer bottle was inserted into Leigh's genitals. This of course caused extreme pain and damage to her body. The forensic details of Leigh's case paint a harrowing picture of the violence she endured in her final moments. Mchugh and the others who were possibly there likely realized what they had done. Mchugh knew that if Leigh lived, she would inform the police and tell them who did this to her, and his life could be forever ruined. Mchugh looked around the sand dunes, and as he scoured the scene, he spotted something. A large rock. This rock weighed 5.6 kilograms, or around 12 pounds. It was incredibly large and blunt. As Leigh lay in the sand in extreme pain, Mchugh retrieved the rock. He then stood over Leigh and raised the rock above his head. He swung down over and over and over again. He hit Leigh's head with such force that her skull cracked. The extent of her injuries was so severe that brain tissue was exposed due to the force of the blows. Upon killing Leigh, Mchugh dropped the rock and fled from the scene. The scene he left behind was incredibly gruesome, with blood spatters reaching 2.8 meters away from Leigh's body. Meanwhile, 11 p.m. was quickly approaching, and Leigh's mother and stepfather made their way to pick her up. They arrived at the venue, but they couldn't see Leigh anywhere. The two searched for her in the general area, but she was nowhere to be seen. They simply assumed that Leigh might have gone to a friend's house for the night, so her mother and stepfather decided to return home and wait for her there. But of course, Leigh did not come back. The morning after, her stepfather resumed the search. As he walked through the sand dunes, less than 100 meters away from where the party was held, he found her. As you can imagine, the sight was incredibly distressing. He immediately called the emergency services, and an investigation began. A crime scene was established, and Leigh's remains were taken away for an autopsy. Leigh's cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. As I mentioned, her skull was severely fractured, and she had extreme damage to the brain, with brain tissue being exposed. However, the investigators found something truly odd. The strikes with the rock which ultimately killed Leigh came from multiple directions, meaning that more than one person was likely responsible. Leigh also suffered significant internal trauma to her ribs, liver, and kidneys. These injuries suggest that she was subjected to repeated forceful blows. Signs of asphyxiation hemorrhages were found, indicating that strangulation or compression of her neck may have occurred during the attack. Leigh also suffered horrific injuries to her privates, including tearing and internal bleeding. The injuries pointed to the use of a broken beer bottle. Sand was also discovered in her mouth and her airways, forcibly inserted during the attack. Leigh was also partially undressed. Bloodstains were found spread across a wide area, indicating an extremely violent struggle. Reports indicated that more than one person was responsible. The media soon picked up on this story, and various factors caught the public's attention. Leigh's unique name, her young age, and of course the extreme violence that was used in the murder. The police got to work to find whoever was responsible. This was an incredibly lengthy process. First, the police needed to piece together what exactly had happened. The area was closed off, and forensic examinations were conducted to collect the evidence. Approximately 150 people were questioned during the investigation. The investigation was littered with rumours, false information, and allegedly poor recollections. There was also a noted, quote, chilling silence from the parents of other teenagers at the party, which impeded information gathering. The local community's reluctance to come forward with information created challenges for the investigators seeking to piece together the events leading up to Leigh's death. Many of the party attendees were underage teenagers who may have withheld information to avoid implicating themselves or their friends. This silence was compounded by the parents of these teenagers, who appeared to discourage open cooperation with the police. The parents likely feared that their children would face legal consequences for their involvement in underage drinking or drug use, or if they took part in the harassment of Leigh. Some witnesses later admitted to giving false information, further complicating the investigation. Some of the teenagers' parents may have even pressured others in the community to remain silent. All of this meant that key individuals who may have been involved in or witnessed significant events were never fully held accountable. When it came to questioning, detectives targeted the males from the party. Several potential suspects were asked for blood samples. They were also asked to give the police the clothing they wore on the night of the murder. Mchugh Webster was one such suspect. Officers then took the cameras that were used on the night and looked through all of the film. They wanted to check if any of the suspects had given them different clothing. While looking through the photographs, they found an image of Mchugh, and they checked his clothing. Mchugh Webster had given them a different set of clothing. This set the alarm bells off in the police's mind. Witnesses reported seeing Mchugh follow Leigh into the dunes after she had left the party. And so, Mchugh was grilled about his involvement that night, 3 months after the murder. When the police spoke to him, he could not provide a credible explanation for his whereabouts during the time that Leigh was murdered. Mchugh initially denied any involvement, but the pressure mounted after evidence was presented to him. The police continued questioning him until the pressure became too much and he eventually cracked, confessing to killing her. His confession provided chilling details about the events leading up to her death. Mchugh claimed that he saw Leigh walking across the grass towards the end of the car park of the venue. He claimed to have yelled out to her, "Leigh, don't go down there," but that she turned around and told him to F off and leave her alone. He followed and saw Leigh sitting down on the grass. He walked up to her and claimed to speak to her. He said that he went with the intention of forcing himself upon her. But Mchugh claimed that the two walked down to the bushes and he began to take her clothes off. He told the police that the two were about to engage in consensual intercourse, but that she started pushing him away and saying, "Don't, I don't want to." Mchugh said that he lost his temper and he just did what he did. Mchugh said he grabbed her throat and choked her before grabbing the rock and killing her. Following this confession, Mchugh was arrested and charged with the murder. Although Mchugh never confessed to actually essaying Leigh with the broken bottle, and the police never bothered to ask him if he acted alone. If Mchugh didn't do this to her, then who did? Was anyone else involved? If so, then how many people were? During the investigation, the 15-year-old I mentioned earlier was also arrested. Specific details about the legal proceedings and outcomes for this individual are limited due to his age at the time of the offence. He was initially sentenced to 6 months in a juvenile detention centre after pleading guilty. However, there was an appeal. The court reasoned that there was insufficient evidence to prove the SA, and so the sentence was reduced to 100 hours of community service. As the investigation progressed, more attention turned to the other 18-year-old, Guy Wilson. Guy admitted to pushing Leigh, pouring beer over her head, spitting on her, and attempting to throw a beer bottle at her during the party. He was released on bail pending sentencing. During this time, Guy allegedly made a threatening remark about Leigh's younger sister. Leigh's stepfather Brad heard about this, and he confronted Guy and attacked him. The exact details of the attack were not widely reported, but it was significant enough for legal action to be taken against the stepdad. In court, Leigh's stepfather pleaded guilty to the charge, but the judge sentenced him to a 12-month good behaviour bond and chose not to record the conviction due to the emotional and turbulent time. Guy Wilson pleaded guilty to the attack charges. He was only sentenced to 100 hours of community service. Matthew Webster pleaded guilty to Leigh's murder before the trial officially began, which meant there was no full courtroom trial, but his guilty plea avoided the need for a prolonged and detailed legal proceeding. But there was still the lingering issue. He denied participating in the earlier essay with the glass bottle, which caused Leigh significant genital injuries and trauma. So, was someone else involved? Well, we will never truly know. There were some witnesses who came forward during the investigation who plainly stated that they saw Matthew and Guy leave the surf club together, and the 15-year-old who initially forced himself upon Leigh, along with Guy Wilson, had no credible alibi regarding their movements around the time of Leigh's death. This was allegedly never pursued any further. So forensic evidence at the scene and witness accounts implicated multiple people in the events leading to the assault and murder, and Matthew was never held accountable for the SA. But because the legal proceedings only focused on the murder charges, the SA remained unaddressed, allowing Matthew and others at the party to escape accountability for this part of the crime. This has contributed to some doubts and concerns about the full truth of what happened that night. If others truly were involved, this is a serious miscarriage of justice. Many believe that Matthew's confession was incomplete. Matthew was and is the only recognized killer of Leigh Leigh and was sentenced to 20 years in prison with a minimum term of 14 years. Following this, the police faced scrutiny. There were concerns about how the evidence was collected and handled, particularly regarding the investigation. A number of suspects, including Matthew Weber, claimed to have been beaten by the officers. They also faced criticism for not pursuing the other possible killers. They also faced criticism as it took the police 3 months to charge Matthew with the murder, even though they knew that he had lied about his whereabouts early on into the investigation. The family of Leigh are also incredibly unhappy about the relatively few convictions. Multiple people attacked Leigh that night, but hardly anyone faced justice. Matthew was later released on parole in June of 2004, after serving 14.5 years of his sentence. The family of Leigh feel like she was failed by the authorities. They believe that others involved in the events leading to her death were not investigated or prosecuted, and their experiences has led them to advocate for more comprehensive investigations into cases of SA and murder, hoping to prevent other families from suffering the same traumatic aftermath. As of right now, no other person has been found guilty of the horrific acts inflicted upon Leigh.